Familiar jazz music was playing from my late husband's old radio when my son-in-law walked into the living room. He yanked out the cord and lifted the radio. Every day, with this pile of scrap metal. "It gives me a headache," he shouted. Before I could stand, the radio shattered across the floor. I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to speak, but she only shrugged. "He's right, Mom." I silently picked up every broken piece. 3 days later, when they came home, they started pounding on the door and screaming like mad. "I'm grateful you're here with me today." Before we begin, drop a comment below. Have you or someone you know ever dealt with financial exploitation or had to protect a vulnerable family member? Your experience matters, and sharing helps others feel less alone. Quick note, some details are adjusted for storytelling, but the core message is what I hope resonates with you. The sound of splintering walnut wood cut through autumn leaves like a knife through memory. I had been sitting in my leather armchair at 4:15 that afternoon, the way I had every Friday for 36 years, listening to the 1987 Walnut radio Russell bought the year we purchased the house. Golden July light streamed through the windows, the same windows I'd cleaned every spring since 1987. The same view of Oakmont Drive I'd watched change from young maples to towering shade trees. The radio played softly, Chet Baker's trumpet carrying Russell's favorite song through the living room, and for those few minutes I could almost forget that the house no longer felt like mine. Brent stormed in at 4:20 without knocking. Brent, 42, wearing an expensive navy shirt that cost more than my weekly groceries, crossed the living room in 4 strides. He didn't speak. He reached down, snapped the power knob off the radio with a violent twist, and ripped the cord from the wall socket. The music died mid-note. "Every single day with this piece of junk," he said, his voice tight with something that sounded like rage but felt like calculation. "It's giving me a headache." He lifted the radio 15 pounds of solid walnut and vacuum tubes and raised it above his head. For one suspended second, I thought he might reconsider. Then he slammed it down onto the hardwood floor with enough force that I felt the impact through my chair. The walnut housing split down the center. Vacuum tubes shattered, scattering glass fragments across the floor in a constellation of destruction. The brass tuning dial broke free and rolled under the sofa. The fabric speaker cone tore with a sound like ripping silk. "In this house," Brent said, breathing hard, "we need higher standards." He stepped over the wreckage and walked toward the kitchen without looking back. I didn't move. I stared at the shattered remains of 36 years. Russell had bought that radio the week we moved in, carried it through the front door himself, set it on the shelf with careful hands. It had played through dinner parties and Christmas mornings through the afternoon my mother died, and the evening we learned Briar was pregnant. It had survived 3 decades of life, and in 5 seconds Brent had reduced it to splinters. "Do you know what it feels like to be erased in your own home, Mom?" Briar appeared in the doorway, 39 years old and still wearing her ICU nurse's scrubs. Her face was pale from another 12-hour shift at Charlotte Memorial dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in the same practical ponytail she'd worn since nursing school. My daughter, the child I'd raised to stand up for what was right, to speak truth, even when it cost something. I looked at her, waited for her to say what needed to be said. Waited for her to tell Brent that he'd crossed a line, that destruction of someone else's property wasn't acceptable, that this was my house, and he was a guest, and guests don't destroy their host's belongings. She released a nervous laugh. It was a small sound, barely more than an exhale, but it hit me like a physical blow. I knew that laugh. I'd heard it before from witnesses who were afraid to tell the truth, from people who'd rather appease a predator than risk confrontation. It was the sound of someone choosing the easy lie over the hard truth. "Honestly," Briar said, that nervous laugh still threading through her words, "I can't take it anymore either, Mom. That thing should have been thrown out years ago." She turned and followed Brent into the kitchen. The betrayal was complete. I sat in that chair for another hour. The sun moved across the floor, illuminating the scattered glass, the split wood, the torn fabric. I heard them in the kitchen, heard the clink of dinner plates, the murmur of conversation, the sound of two people who'd just destroyed something precious and moved on without a second thought. At 6 o'clock, when I was certain they were occupied, I moved. I dropped to my knees on the hardwood floor and began collecting pieces, every splinter of walnut, every wire, every shard of glass. I found an old cardboard box in the garage and lined it with newspaper, then methodically, professionally, the way I'd been trained to preserve evidence at a crime scene, I gathered every fragment. 23 years as a senior fraud investigator at First National Federal Bank, retired in 2015, but the instincts don't retire with you, taught me one absolute truth: preserve everything, reconstruct later. I'd spent 2 decades documenting fraud schemes, tracking paper trails, building cases that could withstand federal prosecution. 340 cases. I'd never lost one. I placed the last splinter in the box at 8:47 p.m., sealed it, carried it upstairs to my bedroom. At 10 o'clock, when the house had finally gone quiet, I went to my wardrobe and removed the false panel at the back. Behind it sat a yellow-covered ledger, 11 months of documentation, 247 pages of observations written in careful script. I opened it to page 248 and picked up my pen. July 18, 2023. The radio destroyed. Target has escalated. Time to execute. I looked at Russell's photograph on my nightstand, silver frame, black and white image, his gentle smile frozen in 1986. "You bought it the first year we moved here," I whispered. "I will keep it, every piece." I turned back to the ledger and studied the timeline I'd been building. 11 months of surveillance. 11 months of watching the man living under my roof, documenting his patterns, tracking his movements, recording his statements, bank transaction records, property deed searches, insurance policy modifications, power of attorney documents signed while I was supposedly too grief-stricken to notice. Brent thought I was a grieving old woman too weak to see what was happening in her own home. He thought wrong. 340 federal fraud cases. I'd tracked financial predators for 23 years, predators who believed they were smarter, faster, more sophisticated than the systems designed to catch them. I documented their schemes, testified against them in federal court, watched them realize too late that the quiet woman taking notes had been 10 steps ahead the entire time. Brent would be no different. I closed the ledger and set the pen down carefully beside Russell's photograph. 11 months of watching, 11 months of documentation. The radio wasn't the trigger, it was confirmation. He'd escalated from subtle manipulation to open destruction, which meant he felt confident, which meant he'd grown careless. And careless men made mistakes. For the first time in 13 months, I slept deeply because I knew that tomorrow, when they left for work, the real investigation would begin. And he had left his laptop unlocked last Tuesday. The blue glow seeping under his office door at 1 a.m. was either carelessness or a trap, and I had spent 23 years learning to tell the difference. I stood in the dark hallway for 90 seconds listening. Brent's bedroom door remained closed. Briar's breathing came steady from the guest room, exhausted ICU sleep. The house settled with familiar creaks, and I moved. The office door was ajar. I pushed it open 6 inches and slipped through, easing it closed without letting the latch click. The laptop sat on the desk screen, active, bathing the room in blue light. I touched the mouse pad. The screen flared bright. Everything was unlocked. Email client open, banking apps logged in, browser history exposed, no password protection, no lock screen complete access. 23 years taught me opportunities like this never come twice. I pulled the chair back slowly. It had a squeaky wheel I'd noted Thursday, and sat. Started with email. The folder structure told me everything before I opened a single message. 6 folders for 6 financial institutions: Capital One, Chase, American Express, Discover, Citibank, Wells Fargo. Methodical, organized. I clicked the first. Capital One. Application approved. November 2022. Credit limit $45,000. Current balance maxed. Statement history showed 8 months of charges. $1,400 steakhouse dinners. $2,800 Atlanta hotels. Electronics. Clothing. Cash advances. Chase. Same pattern. American Express, same. 4th, 5th, 6th. 6 high-limit credit cards. Everyone opened using my identity, my name, my social security number, my forged signature. I pulled up the application images. The signature slant was off by 3 degrees lowercase r. In Mercer had too much forward lean. Only someone who'd analyzed thousands of forgeries would notice, but I saw it in 2 seconds. I'd testified as handwriting expert in federal court 17 times. 8 months. Total documented theft, $78,000. 6 credit lines, I whispered. 8 months, $78,000. He thought I was too old to count. I pulled out my phone and began photographing. Screen after screen, every statement, every charge, every forged signature. Silent shutter, fast hands, maybe 30 minutes before risk escalated. At 2:03 a.m., as I photographed the final statement, a door opened down the hall. Footsteps, heavy, male, bathroom. I killed the monitor instantly. Pressed flat against the wall behind the door, complete darkness. Bathroom door opened. Light spilled. Running water 30 seconds, feeling like 30 minutes. Footsteps receding. Bedroom door clicked. I stood motionless for 2 full minutes, counting every second. Then reactivated the screen. Deeper in his files folder labeled SP Project. Email thread with Silver Pines Memory Care, February through July. Brent described severe cognitive decline, disorientation, memory gaps. Complete fabrications. The facility responded with intake procedures, costs timelines. The final attachment stopped my blood admission packet. Fully completed. My name, my birth date, my social security number. Psychological evaluation typed by Brent describing symptoms I'd never experienced. Forged physician signature. Fabricated medical history. Most recent email dated July 10th. Finalizing placement within 60 days. Liquidating real estate follows immediately after. On the desk, Russell's photograph lay face down. Have you ever held evidence of your own erasure in your hands? I turned Russell's photo upright. Hold on, sweetheart, I whispered. 15 more minutes. I photographed every page of the Silver Pines file, then opened his messaging app. Text thread with unnamed Atlanta area code, July 15th. Deadline remains December 31st. You have 5 months left. Brent's reply, I know I'm handling it. This old woman is tougher than the previous ones. The stranger, I don't care about tough. 95,000 plus interest, before the new year. I read it 3 times. Photographed it 4 times from different angles. Previous ones. Not previous attempts. Previous ones. Plural. Human. Victims. I wasn't his first. There was a pattern. A history. Other elderly women who'd been identified, approached, exploited. How many where were they now? A pattern meant a trail. A trail meant documentation. Documentation meant prosecutable evidence. Previous ones. 2 words that transformed theft into hunting. I checked the time 2:17 a.m. needed to move. I returned to his email archive and began systematic extraction. Credit folders, Silver Pines correspondence, financial communications, real estate appraisals ordered without my knowledge, insurance inquiries, power of attorney templates. My phone clicked silently. Screen after screen. Evidence layering upon evidence. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was systematic dismantling of a human being's legal existence. 67 photographs total, every angle documented, every transaction captured, every forged signature preserved, methodical, flawless, professional. My hands remained steady. I'd done this hundreds of times in federal investigations building cases that would withstand defense scrutiny and appellate review. I knew what prosecutors needed. I knew what judges demanded. I knew how to build unassailable evidence chains. Except this time the victim's name in every document was my own. I verified the final photo, then powered down the monitor. Let my eyes adjust. Listened 90 seconds, no movement. I pushed the chair to its exact position, and moved toward the door. The hallway was empty. I crossed to my bedroom in 12 silent steps and closed the door with practiced gentleness. I sat on my bed and reviewed the photographs. 67 images, 78,000 in theft. a nursing home conspiracy to erase me from legal existence, a $95,000 Atlanta debt, and somewhere other victims' previous ones who hadn't had federal fraud training to fight back. Before I could chase ghosts, I needed to secure what I'd captured: 7 redundant copies, multiple secure locations, one trustworthy recipient who would know exactly what to do with evidence of this magnitude. I checked the time, 2:23 a.m. Vernon Dalton's phone would ring at exactly 5:30, and the call he'd been waiting 35 years to answer would finally come. At 3 in the morning, I pulled out the tools of a 23-year career, an air-gapped laptop, encrypted USB drives, and the absolute certainty that evidence exists only when it exists in 7 places. I sat on my bed and powered on the laptop a machine that had never connected to the compromised home Wi-Fi that ran only on secure cellular data that contained investigation protocols I'd refined over 2 decades at First National Federal Bank. The screen's blue glow reflected off Russell's picture frame as I connected my phone and began transferring all 67 photographs. Rule 1 of federal investigation: evidence that exists in only one place doesn't exist at all. I worked in absolute silence. The house around me remained dark, sleeping, unaware. Brent's bedroom door stayed closed. Briar's breathing continued steady from the guest room. And I began the most critical phase: evidence multiplication. 7 identical packets, 7 separate destinations, 7 insurance policies against destruction, deletion, or denial. First encrypted cloud upload via secure cellular connection. Server location randomized password protected with military-grade encryption. Upload complete at 3:22 a.m. Second and third, 2 hardware USB drives each containing complete evidence sets. I wrapped them in static-proof bags and sealed them. One would go in my bedroom safe, the other in a safety deposit box I'd maintained separately for 16 years. Brent didn't know it existed. Fourth full physical printout. 67 photographs printed on high-quality paper with timestamps, metadata preserved. I collated them into a bound folder with index tabs, locked it in the bedroom safe beside the first USB drive. Fifth, encrypted email to Vernon Dalton with password-protected attachment. The file contained everything: transaction records forged, signatures, Silver Pines correspondence, Atlanta text thread. I typed Vernon's address, carefully added the subject line, evidence package elder fraud case, and hit send at 4:11 a.m. Sixth formal complaint packet addressed to State AG's Elder Fraud Division. I deliberately bypass local police complex. Financial fraud across multiple institutions requires state-level jurisdiction first to ensure unalterable official record. Local departments defer to federal systems for cases exceeding simple theft. I knew the protocols. I'd testified under them dozens of times. Seventh digital submission to IC3.gov, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, Federal Reporting System for Financial Crimes. I filled out the detailed form, attached evidence files submitted at 4:47 a.m. Confirmation number appeared on screen. IC 3-2 02 3-0 719-4 847. 7 copies, 7 destinations, 0 trust. I closed the laptop and pulled one final item from my desk drawer, a sealed envelope dated March 14th, 2023. 4 months ago. The day I'd found his first power of attorney draft hidden in the kitchen drawer. Inside was a single handwritten page containing my complete counter strategy, every step I would take if he escalated. Lock changes, evidence protocols, legal filing sequence, asset protection measures, exit timeline. I'd written it in careful script, dated it, sealed it. I placed it in the safe next to the physical evidence printouts. Not time yet. But when he eventually read it, and he'd understand I'd been 3 moves ahead from the beginning. March 14th. I whispered to the darkness. I wrote this the day I knew for certain. He thinks tonight was my starting point. It was my closing argument. At precisely 5:30 a.m., first pale light touching the window, I picked up my phone and dialed Vernon Dalton. Vernon, 71, and Russell's closest friend for 40 years, answered on the second ring. His voice came rough with sleep, but sharpened instantly when he heard my name. Lorraine. What's happened? Vernon, I need your help, I said quietly. Elder abuse case, complex financial fraud, and I'm the victim. Silence for 3 seconds. Then, in the 35 years I knew Russell and worked with you, you've never made an allegation without an ironclad file. What do you have? I delivered a 4-minute executive summary. 13 months of calculated isolation. Radio destroyed Friday night. Identity theft across 6 credit accounts. Silver Pines admission packet with forged signatures. Power of attorney papers. $95,000 debt to an Atlanta contact. Text messages referencing previous ones. Vernon didn't interrupt once. His breathing stayed even professional. I heard paper rustling. He was taking notes. You extracted this from his laptop? He asked when I finished. 67 photographs, every document, every transaction, every forged signature. Long silence. His voice carried weight when he finally spoke. 35 years of weight. He'd stood beside Russell at our wedding in 1987, drafted Russell's will in 2020, sat in the front row at his funeral. Now he would defend Russell's widow. If your documentation holds, and I know your work, Lorraine, it will. He faces 5 to 15 years, federal prison minimum. Elder financial exploitation across state lines, identity theft, forgery, conspiracy. Can we move Monday? We can, but understand files pulled from his laptop without consent can't be primary criminal evidence. Search and seizure constraints. However, they're sufficient to trigger formal AG filing, which generates lawful federal warrant. Once that warrant executes, everything becomes admissible. So we file with the AG first. Exactly. My office. Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp. He paused. Lorraine, do not confront him yet. Not until the file is complete and submitted. Can you maintain normalcy for 48 hours? I looked at the closed bedroom door. Beyond it, down the hall, the man who'd planned my institutionalization slept peacefully in a house he thought he controlled. Yes, I said, I can. Monday at 9, bring everything. I hung up and looked out the window. Brent's pickup truck sat in my driveway exactly where he'd parked it 13 months ago with promises of temporary housing and Breyer's exhausted gratitude. The first golden rays of Saturday morning sun touched the hood. Monday, 2 days. 48 hours to finalize everything I'd been building for 11 months. I glanced at the safe containing 7 copies of evidence, the sealed March envelope, and the velvet box holding Russell's wedding ring. 48 hours, I whispered, not to build a case that was already built. 48 hours to prepare the battlefield. I set the phone down and watched Brent's truck through my window. Until Monday at 9, I had to sit at the breakfast table across from the man who'd forged my signature, planned my erasure, and stolen in my name and pretend I knew nothing. But first there was research to do about a memory care facility that shouldn't exist. At 9 on Saturday morning, while Brent and Breyer slept down the hall, I typed 6 words into my secure laptop, Silver Pines Memory Care Investigation. The search returned 17 results. The first one stopped me cold. State Attorney General press release dated March 2023. AG opens investigation into Silver Pines Memory Care Systemic Medicare, billing fraud alleged. I clicked through to the full document. 2-page brief detailing allegations of falsifying patient charts, billing for services never rendered, taking kickbacks from corporate physicians who rubber-stamped admissions without proper evaluation. The facility was under active investigation. Compromised, desperate, highly susceptible to fraudulent guardianship exploitation. He didn't pick this facility randomly. He researched them. He targeted them specifically because they were corrupt enough to accept questionable admissions without asking difficult questions. I printed the AG legal briefs on my portable printer, wireless disabled, USB connection, only no network traces. Filed them into my blue evidence folder. Wrote a note in the margin. Premeditation target, actively sourced compromised facility to simplify illegal asset seizure. This elevated the case. Not just standard fraud, active conspiracy, criminal sophistication. Brent didn't stumble into an opportunity. He engineered an entire ecosystem of corruption to make my erasure seamless. I sat back in my chair and looked at the wall of evidence I'd been building. Every detail was calculated, right down to choosing a facility desperate enough to process fraudulent paperwork without scrutiny. Saturday and Sunday passed in careful performance. I sat across from Brent at breakfast, smiled politely, passed him the coffee. He asked about my weekend plans. I mentioned gardening, maybe a library trip. Normal, pleasant, completely fabricated. Sunday dinner was harder. Breyer tried to mediate the silence with nervous chatter about her ICU cases, her upcoming shift schedule. Brent cut his steak methodically, occasionally glancing at me with what might have been suspicion or might have been nothing at all. "You seem quiet this weekend, Lorraine," he said at one point. "Everything all right?" "Just tired, dear," I replied, meeting his eyes without flinching. "It's been a long week." Have you ever smiled at someone across a breakfast table while holding proof they plan to erase you? Every smile was a mask. Every good morning tasted like ash. 7 copies of his crimes sat locked in my bedroom safe 40 feet away. Bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit guardianship exploitation, and he had no idea. I counted down: 48 hours, 36 hours, 24 hours, 18, 12. Monday morning arrived. At 8 o'clock, 1 hour before my meeting with Vernon, I drove to Charlotte Medical Group and walked unannounced into Dr. Hugh Prescott's private office. Dr. Prescott, 58, and startled to see me without an appointment, looked up from his desk. He'd been my family physician for 12 years, treated my pneumonia in 2015, monitored Russell's declining health in his final months, signed Russell's death certificate. "Lorraine," he said, standing quickly, "is everything all right? You're not scheduled until September." "I need to ask you something," I said, closing his office door behind me. "And I need you to tell me the absolute truth." His expression shifted. Professional concern. "Of course, sit down. What's happened?" I sat across from his desk and pulled out my briefcase, opened it, removed the Silver Pines admission packet, the one with my forged psychological evaluation. "Did Brent contact you about my mental health?" His face went pale. The silence lasted 5 seconds too long. That told me everything. "Hugh," I said quietly, "did my son-in-law contact you about declaring me cognitively impaired?" He sat down slowly, rubbed his face with both hands. "He came to my office in April," he said finally. "April 12th. Said he was concerned about memory issues, disorientation, confusion. Asked if I could provide official documentation of cognitive decline for facility placement purposes. April, 3 months before the radio. The planning started long before I knew I was prey. What did you tell him?" My voice stayed level. "I refused. Completely. Told him I couldn't ethically provide any diagnosis without examination, and that even if I examined you, I saw no evidence of any cognitive impairment whatsoever." He looked at me directly. "You're one of the sharpest patients I have, Lorraine. Always have been. There was nothing to document. But you didn't tell me he'd asked?" He looked down at his desk. "I thought it was family tension. Adult children worried about aging parents sometimes jumping to conclusions. I didn't want to create unnecessary drama between you and Breyer." "This isn't Breyer's concern," I said. "Brent approached you directly, not my daughter." I realize that now. His voice carried guilt. "What's happened?" I showed him the Silver Pines admission packet, the forged psychological evaluation, the fabricated medical history, the completed intake paperwork with his name listed as attending physician, a complete forgery. He read it in silence. His hands started trembling. "He was building a fraudulent medical file," I said, "using your refusal as cover while forging documentation anyway. If I'd been successfully placed in Silver Pines under fraudulent guardianship, you would have been listed as the authorizing physician. Your reputation would have been destroyed along with my freedom." "Oh my God." He looked up, horror dawning. "Identity theft, elder abuse, Medicaid fraud. This is federal." "I know. I spent 23 years investigating fraud at First National. I know exactly what this is." He stood up, moved to his computer. "I'm writing an affidavit right now, notarized, dated, everything." He typed for 6 minutes straight. Read it aloud. "Margaret Lorraine Mercer, age 68, is in peak cognitive health. No evidence of memory impairment, disorientation, or decline observed in 12 years as attending physician. Brent Ashford attempted to solicit fraudulent diagnosis on April 12, 2023. Request was denied under HIPAA regulations and ethical medical standards. Patient demonstrates exceptional mental clarity and capacity." He printed 2 copies, signed both. Applied his notary seal, he maintained certification for medical legal documents, handed me the original. "I am so deeply sorry, Lorraine," he said. "I should have called you immediately in April. I should have reported his request. I thought I was avoiding family conflict. Instead, His voice broke slightly. "You're fixing it now, Hugh," I said, folding the affidavit carefully into my briefcase. "That's what matters." I walked out of his office at 8:45, 15 minutes before my meeting with Vernon. The medical shield was secured unassailable documentation that I possessed full cognitive capacity, plus evidence that Brent had actively sought fraudulent diagnosis 3 months before the radio incident. Premeditation, conspiracy, systematic planning. As I drove toward Dalton and Associates in Uptown Charlotte, I reviewed the evidence arsenal bank fraud documentation, Silver Pines corruption proof, Dr. Prescott's notarized affidavit. But I had no idea Vernon was about to reveal something that would reframe everything a phone call Brent made to his office just last week, fishing for exactly the wrong information from exactly the wrong lawyer. Vernon spread my evidence across his oak desk at 9 o'clock sharp like a prosecutor, laying out a murder case. Except in this story, the victim was still breathing and holding the smoking gun. His office hadn't changed in 30 years. Dark wood paneling, walls lined with federal reporters from floor to ceiling, a framed 1990 photograph of Vernon and Russell at a charity gala, both of them younger, laughing, holding champagne glasses. Vernon stood when I entered, 71 years carried with the confidence of 4 decades practicing law. "Show me what you have, Lorraine," he said, gesturing to the conference table. "Leave nothing out." I set my briefcase down and began pulling documents. Credit card statements showing the fraudulent accounts, signature comparison sheets, Silver Pines admission packet with forged medical history. Dr. Prescott's notarized affidavit dated this morning. The state AG press release about Silver Pines corruption, screenshots of Atlanta text messages, every piece of the 11-month investigation organized in color-coded folders. Vernon put on his reading glasses and began examining each document methodically. He picked up the credit application forgeries, first studied them against my legitimate signature from Russell's will, set them down, moved to the Silver Pines emails, then the medical forgeries. He looked up after 15 minutes. Aggravated identity theft under Title 18, Section 1028A. Bank fraud under Section 1344. State-level elder financial exploitation. Forgery of legal documents. Conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud. He removed his glasses. "Lorraine, this isn't just theft. This is systematic predation." "What's he facing?" "If this file holds and I know your work, it will 5 to 15 years federal prison, minimum. 5 to 15 years, federal prison, minimum. I had investigated fraud for 23 years, testified in dozens of prosecutions, but hearing those words applied to the man sleeping down the hall from my bedroom felt like vindication and horror, mixing in equal measure. The laptop files, Vernon said, setting down Dr. Prescott's affidavit. They can't be used directly as primary evidence in criminal trial. 4th Amendment. You're a civilian, not law enforcement with warrant authority. My stomach dropped. So they're inadmissible. In criminal court, yes, but he held up one finger. They're more than sufficient to trigger formal filing with the state AG's Elder Fraud Division. That filing, backed by Dr. Prescott's affidavit and the Silver Pines corruption evidence, generates probable cause. Probable cause generates a lawful federal search warrant. That warrant captures everything legally. I understood immediately. So we're lighting the fuse, not throwing the bomb. Precisely. The laptop evidence is the trigger. The warrant is the weapon. Everything he's done gets swept up in the federal investigation once that warrant executes. And based on what you've shown me, that warrant will be approved within 72 hours. He organized my documents into 3 stacks: criminal evidence, civil remedies, protective measures. His hands moved with the precision of someone who'd built cases for 45 years. Then he set down his pen and leaned back. A dry, humorless smile crossed his face. "Lorraine, there's one more thing you need to know." I waited. Last Thursday, July 17th, 2 days before the radio incident, someone called my office asking about estate law procedures. He pulled a yellow legal notepad from his desk drawer. Specifically, how to execute a forced power of attorney against an unwilling elderly relative who wasn't thinking clearly anymore. My breath caught. The receptionist transferred the call to me. The man on the line introduced himself as Brent Ashford's son-in-law of a client. He wanted to know about psychiatric evaluations, doctor sign-offs, legal timelines for declaring incompetence. "He called you." I stared at Vernon, Russell's closest friend for 35 years. Vernon's smile turned colder. "He thought I was just a generic estate lawyer whose name appeared in your late husband's will. He had no idea Russell and I were college roommates, business partners on 2 failed ventures in the 80s, best men at each other's weddings. Russell's college roommate, business partner, the man who held our daughter when she was 3 hours old, and Brent asked him how to institutionalize me. What did you tell him?" My voice came out steady despite the fury building behind my ribs. I gave him generic information about elder care procedures while taking detailed notes. The phone call is log time-stamped, recorded in my client interaction database. It's documentation of premeditation and intent. He tapped the yellow notepad. He asked specifically about overriding patient refusal, about what happens if the elderly person fights the process, about how quickly guardianship can be established once medical documentation exists. July 17th, 2 days before he smashed Russell's radio. Correct. He was already planning the next escalation. The radio wasn't spontaneous rage, it was tactical acceleration. I closed my eyes, breathed, opened them. He had no idea that the lawyer he was consulting was the man who stood beside Russell when Breyer was born, the man who drafted Russell's will, the man who knew every detail of our family. "The world is much smaller than he thinks," Vernon said quietly, "and considerably less forgiving." He closed the evidence files and looked at me directly. "I'll coordinate with the state AG's office this afternoon. Formal complaint packets filed by close of business today. But there's one critical piece you need before the legal machine starts moving financial lockdown. The bank accounts. Every account under your name, every asset with your signature, frozen immediately, before he tries anything else." Vernon glanced at his watch. "It's 9:47. Carolina First Federal opens at 10. "Celeste Hewitt," I said. "Branch manager. She was my mentee 15 years ago at First National. I trained her." Vernon stood. "Then you know she'll move fast. Get there when they open. Show her everything. Freeze every account, every access point, every authorization. Then we wait for the warrant." I gathered my documents back into the briefcase, leaving Vernon with copies of everything. He walked me to his office door. "Lorraine," he said as I reached the elevator, "Russell would be proud of what you've built here. Methodical, unassailable, professional." "He bought that radio in 1987, I said. "The year we bought the house. I'm going to fix it, Vernon. Every splinter." "I know you will." I left Vernon's office at 9:52 with a legal strategy in motion and exactly 8 minutes before the bank opened. Celeste was expecting standard Monday morning business routine transactions, balance inquiries, maybe a small business loan consultation. She had no idea I was about to walk through her door with evidence of systematic financial fraud and ask her to freeze every asset tied to my name before Brent could move another dollar. And neither of us knew what the bank's systems would reveal. 3 weeks ago, he'd already tried to drain everything. Celeste Hewitt, my daughter and branch manager at Carolina First Federal, stood from her desk the moment I walked through the frosted glass doors at 10 o'clock, and I saw in her eyes the exact expression I'd trained her to wear 15 years ago when a fraud case was about to explode. She crossed the lobby immediately, 45 years old, branch manager, wearing the confidence of someone who'd climbed from junior fraud analyst to leadership through competence and precision. I'd taught her to read digital footprints of bank fraud back in 2008. Today, she would save her mentor's financial life. "Lorraine," she said, professional smile hiding concern. "I haven't seen you in 6 months. What's wrong?" "I need to activate an emergency fraud protocol," I said quietly. "And Celeste, I'm the victim." Her expression shifted instantly. She guided me through security into her private office, closed the door, locked it. "Tell me everything." I handed her the credit card statements, identity theft documentation, forged signatures. She spread them across her desk, trained eye moving rapidly. 6 fraudulent accounts, 8 months of charges, signatures with 3-degree slant errors, $78,000, she said, voice tight. "Who did this?" "My son-in-law." She stopped reading, looked up. "Your daughter's husband?" "Yes." She turned to her computer, fingers already moving. "How long have you known?" "Discovered it 72 hours ago. Vernon Dalton is filing with the state AG today." Her typing accelerated. "Vernon's involved. Good." She pulled up my account profile master file showing every financial product tied to my identity. Level 5 emergency protocols. Every account, complete lockdown. I watched her work. The same focused intensity from 15 years ago. Celeste scrolled through my account history. Her hand froze on the mouse. Face went pale. "Lorraine," she turned the monitor. "There's something else." 2 flagged applications. Home equity lines of credit. Both dated June 28th, 3 weeks ago. Both using my full identity. Both submitted to out-of-district branches same day. Total draw amount $340,000. $340,000 in 2 applications 3 weeks ago. "He tried to drain your house equity," Celeste said, barely controlled. 2 separate HELOCs, different branches, same day. If both approved, he would have extracted $340,000 from your property. I stared at the screen. The numbers wouldn't process. "Why didn't they approve?" "Address discrepancy." He wrote 42 Oakmont Drive on one, 42 Oakmont Drive on the other. Neither included full Charlotte NC 28209 format. Automated verification flagged them for manual review. Reviewer denied both due to inconsistent formatting. She pulled up application images, my forged signature, my social security number, my birth date, everything perfect except the address line. If he'd formatted the address correctly, first application might have auto-approved before human review. Large HELOCs require verification, but if every field is perfect, the system can push preliminary approval within 48 hours. She met my eyes. "You came within one correctly formatted zip code of losing $340,000. Have you ever learned you were one typo away from financial annihilation?" Combined with the credit cards Brent attempted to steal over $418,000, not $78,000, $418,000. The credit cards were practice runs, testing the system. The real target was always the house equity, the $875,000 property Russell and I paid off in 2019. "When were these submitted?" I asked. "June 28th, 10:37 a.m. first one. 2:15 p.m. second. Celeste pulled up timestamps. 2 different branches, same day, 4 hours apart. 3 weeks before the radio incident. He'd been escalating and only a formatting error stopped him. Celeste's fingers returned to keyboard. "Locking everything down, now." I watched the screen. Checking accounts frozen. Savings frozen. Credit lines frozen. Safe deposit box frozen with secondary authentication. Emergency fraud alerts on my social security number across all 3 bureaus. Every asset tied to my identity now required in-person verification with 2 forms of ID plus manager override. "How tight is this lockdown?" "So tight he can't buy a stick of gum with your name on it." Celeste said without looking up. He tries to use your identity anywhere. Bank, credit union, payday, lender, dealership system rejects it instantly and alerts me personally. She hit a final key with emphasis. Lorraine, he can't access a single dollar. Not now, not tomorrow, not until this fraud case resolves and you explicitly authorize reinstatement. I looked at the monitor showing locked accounts. 43 years of financial history, Russell's insurance payout from 2020, our retirement savings, the home equity Brent tried to steal, all protected. But the protection came with realization if the HELOC applications had approved before I discovered anything, Brent would have walked away with nearly $500,000 while I sat listening to Russell's radio. Then Silver Pines would have sealed me away while he liquidated the rest. The credit cards were the test. The house was always the prize. Celeste, I need copies of those HELOC applications. Every page, every signature, every timestamp. Already printing. She gestured to the humming laser printer. Vernon will want these for the AG filing. She handed me a folder, 47 pages documenting fraud attempts that exceeded anything I'd imagined. I stood to leave. Celeste walked me to her door. Lorraine, I don't know what else he's tried. But if he got this far, there's more. Check everything. I will. I walked out of Carolina First Federal at 10:45 with every financial asset frozen into a fortress Brent couldn't penetrate. But the HELOC discovery changed everything. $78,000 was never the endgame. $418,000 was. And if he'd tried to steal that much 3 weeks ago, what was he planning to do next, now that the Silver Pines 60-day timeline was ticking down? At 5 o'clock Monday evening, I cleared everything off my bedroom desk, lamp books, Russell's reading glasses still resting where he'd left them 4 years ago, and began building what every federal investigator builds when the case gets personal, a war room. The room that had been my sanctuary for 36 years became the nerve center of the most important investigation of my career. I moved personal items to the dresser, creating clear workspace, pulled black twine from a utility drawer, thumbtacks from Russell's old toolbox, sticky notes in 3 colors. 42 years my father worked at the Tribune. 23 years I worked federal fraud cases at First National. I'd built hundreds of case boards. This one just had my name in the center. I stretched black twine horizontally across the wall above the desk, creating a physical timeline. Left anchor point June 2022. Right anchor July 18th, 2023. 13 months stretched between them. I began placing sticky notes in precise chronological order. June 2022. Target moves and temporary housing arrangement. August 2022. Wi-Fi password changed without notice or explanation. October 2022. Caught searching through mail. Claimed looking for utility bills. November 2022. First financial irregularity, noticed credit inquiry on my report. February 2023. Silver Pines Memory Care initial contact discovered in emails. April 12, 2023. Dr. Prescott approached requesting cognitive decline documentation. Refused. May 15, 2023. Unknown document signing event. June 28, 2023. 2 HELOC applications submitted. $340,000 total. Both denied due to address formatting. July 10, 2023. Silver Pines final timeline. Email 60 days to placement. July 15, 2023. Phone call to Vernon Dalton seeking forced POA procedures. July 18, 2023. Radio destroyed. I stepped back and looked at the wall. Have you ever seen your own destruction mapped out in 13 sticky notes? When you see it visualized like this, nothing was random. Every move was choreographed. Every escalation was calculated. June through October, establishment period building trust. November through February, reconnaissance and testing. March through June, active preparation and document gathering. July, execution phase. I arranged 3 folders across the desk. Red folder, financial exploitation. Credit card statements showing 6 fraudulent accounts. HELOC applications for $340,000. Forged signature comparisons. Celeste's fraud report. Total documented theft attempt $418,000. Blue folder, communications evidence. Silver Pine's email thread spanning 5 months, Atlanta debt texts, Vernon's phone call log from July 15th, every digital footprint that proved premeditation, yellow folder witness statements, Dr. Prescott's notarized affidavit documenting April cognitive decline request, Celeste's bank fraud documentation. Tomorrow I'd collect Floyd Lancaster's surveillance photographs my neighbor had been documenting Brent's movements for months without my knowledge. Red for blood money, blue for digital trails, yellow for human testimony, the trinity of federal prosecution. I stood in front of the timeline studying the pattern. Something had been nagging at me since Vernon's office this morning. July 15th, Brent calls Vernon seeking forced POA procedures. July 18th, Brent destroys the radio 3 days later. I thought the radio was rage, loss of control, emotional explosion. But looking at the timeline, it was strategic. He needed a public incident, needed witnesses, specifically Breyer, to see me as unstable, difficult, emotionally volatile. The radio destruction wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated psychological escalation designed to manufacture evidence of decline. He smashed Russell's radio to prove I was mentally unfit. It wasn't rage, it was theater. I pulled out the Silver Pines admission file for final documentation review, flipped through pages systematically forged, medical evaluation fabricated symptom list, fraudulent physician signature. Then I reached the family consensus and support form. I stopped cold. There, unmistakable, genuine, legally binding, was my daughter's signature. Not forged, not mimicked. Breyer Mercer's actual handwriting. The date, May 15th, 2023. 2 months before the radio incident. 3 months before I discovered anything. My daughter had signed paperwork authorizing psychiatric evaluation of her own mother. I stared at the signature, traced it with my finger, compared it to her handwriting on birthday cards in my desk drawer. The slant matched perfectly. The capital B, the way she looped the R in Mercer. Real, genuine, not forged. Memory crashed in like a wave. May 15th, 7 o'clock evening. Breyer walking through the front door after a brutal 12-hour ICU shift. 2 patients had coded that day. 1 didn't make it. Her face was pale eyes hollow with exhaustion and grief. Brent was in the kitchen. Papers spread on the counter, pen ready. "Just sign this, babe," he'd said, sliding the document toward her. "Medical insurance writer updates for your mom. I filled out all the background info already. Just need your signature as secondary contact." Breyer, too tired to stand, too exhausted to read, too trusting to question her husband, had signed without looking. "What is it?" she'd asked, barely focusing. "Nothing major," Brent had said, smooth and reassuring. "Standard stuff. I already handled the details." She'd signed, set down the pen, gone upstairs to shower. He'd taken the page, folded it carefully, and smiled. My daughter worked 12-hour shifts, saving lives, and he used that nobility to sign away mine. I sat at the desk, still holding the form. Not anger at Breyer, she'd been deceived, manipulated, her trust weaponized, her exhaustion exploited. Pure fury at the man who had engineered it. He didn't forge this signature. He didn't need to. He waited until she was too tired to defend herself, too grief-stricken to question, too trusting to read what she was signing. And he used that vulnerability to turn a daughter's signature into a mother's institutionalization authorization. I picked up my pen and added a note to the blue folder. May 15th, 2023, exploitation of medical professionals' exhaustion, fraudulent misrepresentation of document contents. Daughter unknowingly authorized mother's psychiatric evaluation for memory care placement. Witness available. Form obtained through deception. My file against him just gained another federal charge. I sat back and looked at the war room. Timeline spanning 13 months, 3 color-coded folders, 53 pieces of evidence, every move documented, every crime cataloged, every witness identified. But there was one more layer I needed before tomorrow's next phase. In October, when I'd noticed Brent testing the front door locks at 3 in the morning, I'd quietly rerouted my smart doorbell camera to save footage on my personal cellular network instead of the shared home Wi-Fi. He didn't know the camera was recording. Didn't know 7 months of archived footage sat encrypted in my private cloud storage. I needed to review every frame, specifically the weeks between the HELOC denial and the radio destruction. If he'd been planning physical property seizure, there would be reconnaissance, late-night testing, measurements, preparation. The footage would show me exactly what kind of surveillance he'd been running while I slept. At 10 o'clock Monday night, I pulled up the archived smart doorbell footage and scrolled back to July 11th at 3:02 in the morning, the night I'd marked in my ledger simply as unusual activity front door. My tablet glowed in the dark bedroom. I'd rerouted this camera to my personal cellular network back in October 2022, the night I woke at 3:15 and heard the front door handle jiggling. Brent thought the doorbell saved to shared Wi-Fi. He had no idea 7 months of recordings sat encrypted in my private cloud. I pressed play. Infrared night vision rendered everything ghostly green-white. Timestamp, 3:02 a.m. Movement. Brent creeping down the front steps in socks, something metallic in his hand. He walked to the door, pulled out master keys, the kind landlords buy online, tested the first against the deadbolt. Didn't turn. Second key. Third. Fourth. None worked. He pulled out his phone, activated the flashlight, examined the lock, then produced a pocket tape measure, extended it against the door frame, noted dimensions on his phone, moved to the hinge side, measured again, tested the strike plate, took 3 close-up photographs of the lock. 7 minutes total before he slipped back inside. 7 minutes, master keys, tape measure, photographs, complete reconnaissance, operational survey preparing for physical property takeover, mapping vulnerabilities, identifying which locks to defeat, calculating forced entry time. I checked the date July 11th, 2023, 1 week before he smashed Russell's radio. The timeline clicked into place. July 11th, physical reconnaissance. July 15th, phone call to Vernon seeking POA procedures. July 18th, destroy radio to establish my instability. Coordinated operation. Legal paperwork from Vernon medical documentation, from Dr. Prescott witness testimony from Breyer about the radio, then physical lockout backed by Silver Pine's admission. But by July 11th, I'd already compiled 11 months of evidence, already identified the Silver Pines conspiracy, already documented every fraudulent account. He thought he was preparing the endgame. I was already 10 moves ahead. Tuesday morning, 7:31 a.m., the second Brent's truck and Breyer's sedan pulled out. I hit send on the email I'd drafted at midnight. To Breyer Mercer subject, formal notice of occupancy revocation body. This serves as formal notice that as of today, July 22nd, 2023, your license to reside at 42 Oakmont Drive is revoked under North Carolina property law. You hold status of licensees, not tenants. I love you, Mom. Time-stamped, legally binding, heartbreaking. Licensees, not tenants. Vernon taught me the distinction. People living without lease agreements aren't tenants with eviction rights. They're licensees whose occupancy can be revoked with reasonable notice. That distinction would save me. At 9 a.m., Dennis Chambers from Secure Home Locksmith arrived carrying 2 heavy toolboxes and 20 years of experience installing high-security commercial deadbolts. 4 doors, I told him. Front-back garage basement, highest security rating. Grade 1 commercial deadbolts, same kind we install in office buildings. $800 for all 4. Perfect? I need them unbreakable. I watched him work. Front door first drill chisel tap. Old residential deadbolt out. New one slid into place with satisfying weight. Heavy brass, reinforced strike plate, 3-inch screws biting deep into the frame. Back door, garage entrance, basement access. 90 minutes total. 20 laser-cut keys, 5 per lock. I tested each one. Click, 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 click. The brass was warm from installation. For the first time in 13 months, my locks belonged exclusively to me. After Dennis left at 10:47, I climbed stairs to their bedroom, pulled 4 blue Samsonite suitcases from the hall closet. The set I'd bought Breyer last Christmas, complete matching set. I'd wrapped them in silver paper, written a card for the mountain vacation we've been planning. We talked about Asheville, hiking, family time. Never unzipped, never used. The suitcases I bought hoping we'd make memories together now held everything she'd leave behind. I packed methodically, without anger, without tears, professional precision. Brent's designer suits, Italian leather shoes, expensive cologne, his electric razor, monogrammed cufflinks, everything that made temporary housing feel permanent. Then the hard part. Briar's blue knit Christmas sweater, the one we'd laughed in together last December. Christmas Eve. We'd made pancakes at midnight. She'd worn this and laughed until her sides hurt. 4 months before he tried to steal everything. I folded it with infinite care, placed it with her scrubs running shoes-framed photo from nursing school graduation. Finally, I retrieved the cardboard box from my safe, the one containing every shard of the walnut radio, every splinter, every fragment. I placed it on top of Brent's largest suitcase, taped a note across. If it's just a piece of junk, you won't mind carrying it away. At 2:47 p.m., I positioned the 4 blue suitcases in a neat row by the front door. Brewed Earl Grey tea, sat in Russell's leather armchair facing the window with clear view of the driveway. Brent usually pulled in around 6 o'clock p.m., Briar closer to 6:30. I checked my watch, 2:47. 3 hours and 13 minutes until my home became mine again. 13 months of waiting, 13 months of watching, 13 months of building an unassailable case. 4 blue suitcases by the door, 20 new keys in my pocket, and 3 hours of absolute certainty that I'd done everything right. I sat in that armchair from 2:47 until 6:07, 3 hours and 20 minutes of absolute stillness, watching afternoon light fade across the driveway, listening to the house settle in a silence that was finally completely mine. Then I heard it, the rumble of his truck engine turning onto Oakmont Drive, followed seconds later by the softer hum of Briar's sedan. They had no idea their keys would fail. They had no idea 4 commercial deadbolts now stood between them and the life they thought they controlled. The knock came at 9 sharp Wednesday morning, and the man at Charlotte's front door, my sister's door, where I had been staying since the lockout held evidence I hadn't known existed. Floyd Lancaster, 74 and retired from the Charlotte Observer, knocked at 9 sharp with a flash drive containing 13 months of high-resolution surveillance. He wore a canvas jacket with press credentials still pinned to the lapel, though the laminate had yellowed with age. "Your neighbor Diane gave me your number," he said, extending the drive. "I've been photographing that house since last June. Thought you should see what I've got." I led him to the dining room table where Vernon's documents still covered every surface. Floyd plugged the drive into my laptop without ceremony, and the folder that opened contained 217 files each, labeled with military precision date time, GPS coordinates. "I shoot what doesn't belong," Floyd said. 32 years at the Observer taught me to recognize a story. Your brother-in-law has been running one for over a year. The first image showed Brent loading boxes into his truck at 11:47 a.m. on June 18, 2022. The metadata panel displayed shutter speed, aperture, focal length, and exact latitude-longitude coordinates. This wasn't neighborhood gossip. This was forensic documentation. I clicked through the archive. July 2022. Brent meeting a woman in a CVS parking lot, both leaning against her sedan, in conversation that lasted 17 minutes, according to the timestamp gap. September 2022. Briar loading suitcases into a different vehicle, a red Mazda I'd never seen. November 2022. Brent on the front porch at 2:34 a.m. phone, pressed to his ear, pacing. "You shoot film or digital?" I asked. "Both. Digital for the metadata courts love. Film for the details digital misses." Floyd pulled a manila envelope from his jacket and spread 8 film prints across the table. The grain and contrast made them look like evidence from another era, which in a sense, they were physical proof that couldn't be altered with software. One image stopped me cold. Brent standing at the mailbox January 14, 2023, holding his phone at an angle that captured the screen. Floyd had shot it at 200 millimeters tight enough that I could read the browser window a real estate listing for a property in Wilmington asking price $890,000. That's the moment I knew this wasn't marriage trouble, Floyd said. That's asset liquidation. I looked at the man who'd been watching my sister's house for 13 months while I'd been building my ledger in secret, both of us working parallel investigations without knowing the other existed. Fraud never happens in a vacuum. It leaves ripples that careful observers can map if they're patient enough to watch. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I asked. Because I don't know what I'm photographing until the pattern emerges, Floyd said. I documented. You investigated. Now we have both halves. He was right. My financial evidence proved the fraud. His visual archive proved the conspiracy's timeline, the meetings, the movements that transform numbers into narrative. I need your help with something else, I said. I need to make sure what happens next gets recorded with the same precision you've been using. Floyd's eyes narrowed with interest. You're setting a trap. I'm setting the record straight, but yes, I need cameras. We drove to a security equipment supplier in Matthews, where Floyd bypassed the consumer section and walked directly to the professional surveillance aisle. He selected 4 4K cameras with directional audio weatherproof housings and motion-activated recording that could capture faces in darkness using infrared. Most people install cameras defensively, Floyd said, reading the technical specifications. You're installing them offensively. I'm installing them evidentially, I corrected. When Brent realizes those locks changed, he's going to come back angry. I want every word recorded. Back at the house, Floyd positioned the cameras with a photojournalist's understanding of angles and light. Front entrance wide shot capturing the driveway and porch. Side door, tight frame on the lock, Brent would try to manipulate. Kitchen window perspective into the backyard where previous footage had shown him pacing during phone calls. Living room interior coverage synced to the exterior feeds, creating overlapping fields of observation that eliminated blind spots. He mounted the final camera at 3:40 p.m. running cables through the attic with the efficiency of someone who'd rigged equipment in war zones and political conventions. The control panel went in the guest bedroom 4 screens, displaying real-time feeds from positions Brent wouldn't notice until lawyers made them exhibits. The audio's the key, Floyd said, testing the directional microphones. These will pick up conversation from 40 feet. Whatever he says, we'll have it. The system went live at 4:27 p.m. Floyd stood in the monitoring room adjusting contrast and checking motion sensitivity. On screen, Oakmont Drive looked peaceful in late afternoon light, another quiet Wednesday in a neighborhood where fraud had been hiding behind lawn maintenance and routine. He'll come tonight, Floyd predicted. Men like Brent don't wait when their control gets challenged. He's had 18 hours to realize those locks mean something worse than being locked out. I thought about the evidence we'd assembled: my financial ledger, Vernon's legal documentation, Floyd's photographic archive security footage that would capture whatever came next. The trap wasn't the cameras. The trap was Brent's assumption that he could still manage this situation, still control the narrative, still walk into this house like he owned it. Thank you, I said, for watching, for documenting. I document what I see, Floyd said. What you do with it is investigation. He left at 4:50 p.m., but his cameras stayed 4 electronic witnesses waiting for the moment when anger would override caution, and Brent would return to reclaim what he thought he'd successfully stolen. The notification lit my phone at 6:03 p.m. motion, detected front entrance, and when I opened the feed, I saw Brent's truck in the driveway. But neither of us had anticipated what the infrared lens would capture in the passenger seat: a second figure waiting in darkness, whose face the facial recognition software would identify in 3 seconds. The name appeared on my screen 3 seconds later: Clayton Kelsey, 39, licensed real estate appraiser. Clayton Kelsey, 39, and a licensed real estate appraiser in Charlotte, sat in the passenger seat with his phone screen illuminating his face every 40 seconds. The infrared lens caught his profile in perfect detail: narrow jaw, wireframe glasses, the family resemblance unmistakable. Brent's brother, not just family backup for a difficult conversation. a licensed professional whose credentials made him an asset evaluator, a co-conspirator with technical expertise in the exact field required for property fraud. I watched the feed as both men exited the truck at 6:04 p.m. Brent approached the front door with his key extended confident stride, unchanged from the hundreds of entries Floyd's archive had documented. The key slid into the lock, turned, stopped. The audio caught his confusion before his face did. What the hell? He tried again, forcing the turn. The deadbolt I'd installed that morning held firm. On screen 2, I watched his expression shift from confusion to calculation, to something harder. He pulled the key out, examined it like the metal had betrayed him. Tried a third time. "Try the side door," Brent said, voice tight. Clayton followed him around the corner into camera 3's field of view. Same result. Brent's key entered the lock, turned halfway, stopped against commercial-grade steel that hadn't existed yesterday. Clayton checked his phone screen, glow reflecting off his glasses. "This doesn't make sense," Clayton said. "She's been in Baltimore for 2 weeks." Except I hadn't been. The assumption that I'd stayed in Baltimore after the funeral was their first miscalculation. The assumption that locks couldn't change without warning was their second. I saved the footage with timestamp 18:04:37, noting Clayton's confirmation that they'd been tracking my supposed location. The 4-camera system captured every angle as Brent tested the back entrance. The garage service door even attempted to force a window before Clayton stopped him, with a hand on his shoulder and a shake of his head. Not here. Not on camera. The irony wasn't lost on me. They didn't know about Floyd's lenses, but they sensed surveillance anyway. Brent pulled out his phone at 6:19 p.m., pacing the driveway. The directional microphone picked up fragments. Changed the locks, don't know. Tuesday night. Lawyer tomorrow. Clayton leaned against the truck, scrolling through his phone with methodical swipes. Every 40 seconds he glanced toward the house, then back to his screen. Checking property records, perhaps. Researching his options. Calculating. They stayed for 43 minutes. Brent paced. Clayton watched. Neither attempted to break anything. Neither raised their voice above the level of tense consultation. At 6:46 p.m., Brent stopped. Mid-stride, turned to his brother and said the 5 words the camera captured in perfect clarity: "I have power of attorney." Clayton's response came without hesitation. "We need the lawyer, now." They left at 6:47 p.m. I saved 4 separate footage files, 1 from each camera angle, burned them to 2 separate drives, logged the timestamps in my evidence ledger. 23 years investigating fraud taught me thieves follow patterns, and patterns can be designed. I called Vernon Dalton at 7:14 p.m. He answered before the second ring. "They came back," I said, "both of them." "Both." Brent brought his brother Clayton, real estate appraiser, licensed professional. They spent 43 minutes testing locks they couldn't open. Vernon was quiet for 3 seconds. "You have footage." 4 camera angles, directional audio, timestamps, every word documented. "How much access did he actually gain to Charlotte's accounts?" Vernon asked. The question hung in the air between us, and I felt the weight of 11 months of strategy compress into the answer I'd been building toward since January. Exactly as much as I wanted him to have. Before I tell Vernon what really happened with those account numbers, are you still with me? Comment A if you think I trapped him, or B if you think I got lucky, and add 1 reason in 5 to 10 words. Please note, what follows contains recreated details for narrative purposes, but the strategy is real. Vernon didn't interrupt. He knew the pause meant revelation. January 2023, I said. I opened a checking account at Regional Savings, $12,000. Regional Savings, a small credit union. Brent had no reason to know existed separate from every account Celeste had frozen at Carolina First Federal the previous Monday. Seeded it with enough monthly activity to look legitimate utility payments, grocery withdrawals, the financial pattern of someone living modestly off saved assets. Then I made sure Brent found the statements. You let him steal it, Vernon said, and it wasn't a question. I let him document his own intent. Every withdrawal he made, every transfer he initiated, every time he accessed that account, using forged authorization, it built the prosecution's timeline. He thought 12,000 was the first accessible piece of a larger puzzle. How much did he take from the decoy? 8,300 over 6 months, small amounts, testing boundaries, building confidence. Vernon's exhale carried through the phone. Where were Charlotte's real assets? Where they've been since March 2021. Irrevocable family trust. You as corporate trustee. $1.675 million in diversified portfolio, completely insulated from any power of attorney he claimed to have. The trust documents predate his cohabitation by 15 months, Vernon said, and I could hear him checking dates against the timeline we'd built. He was chasing shadows the entire time. The credit cards, the HELOC attempt, the small account withdrawals, all of it documented evidence of intent against assets he either couldn't access or didn't realize were protected. Silence stretched for 5 seconds. When Vernon spoke again, his voice carried the weight of 38 years in trust law. The decoy wasn't just evidence collection. It was behavior documentation. You gave him a target small enough to attempt, valuable enough to pursue, accessible enough to make him think he'd succeeded. And every move he made created evidence I couldn't have manufactured, I said. He'd been fishing in a stocked pond while the ocean remained locked behind gates he'd never seen. Vernon's laugh came sudden and sharp. You make me wonder why you never went to law school. But the laugh cut short when I told him about the folder Celeste was assembling, the one with timestamps matching every decoy account withdrawal to Brent's geolocation data. His tone shifted from admiration to tactical. How soon can you get that to the Attorney General's office? I checked my watch. 7:23 p.m. Wednesday evening. We had 41 hours before the office opened Monday morning, and I had one more witness who hadn't testified yet. Wren asked her question while measuring flour 9 years old, untouched by suspicion, and holding evidence I hadn't known to look for. The remaining witness was my granddaughter. Saturday morning in Charlotte's kitchen, 41 hours before the Attorney General's office opened, and the person who'd seen the earliest warning signs was measuring chocolate chips on a step stool. Wren Quinn, 9 years old, and my granddaughter had spent every summer weekend at Charlotte's house, since she could walk the way children attach themselves to places that feel safe. And Charlotte's kitchen had always been the safest place she knew. She knew where Charlotte kept the wooden spoons, the mixing bowls, the vanilla extract. Can we make the same kind Aunt Charlotte always made? Wren asked. With extra chocolate chips, I said. Always with extra. She measured with careful precision, leveling each cup with a butter knife. The routine of baking created safe space where children spoke freely, where questions emerged between tasks rather than under interrogation. I miss coming here every weekend, Wren said. Is Grandma Charlotte really not coming back? No, sweetheart, she's not. She folded chocolate chips into batter, then looked up with the expression kids wear when they're about to ask something they've been holding. Why did Uncle Brent bring that mean man with the clipboard to measure Grandma's bedroom walls? The measuring cup in my hand stopped. 23 years of investigative training compressed into the 3 seconds it took me to keep my voice casual. When was this, sweetheart? Spring break, March. The man kept writing numbers in a little book. He had one of those silver tape measures that snap back really loud. March, 4 months before the lockout. What did the man look like? Tall, older than Mom, but not like Grandpa old. He wore a charcoal suit even though it was Saturday. He kept calling Uncle Brent Sir, but his voice sounded mean anyway. Did you hear his name? Wren's face brightened. He had the same name as that friend, the one who came to Easter. Kelsey. Clayton Kelsey, real estate appraiser, conducting reconnaissance in March while Charlotte was still alive, still believing her partner was managing her affairs rather than cataloging her assets. Did they measure other rooms too? I asked. All of them, even the closets. I thought it was weird because Uncle Brent said they were checking for property improvements, but they didn't fix anything. They just measured and wrote numbers and took pictures with their phones. Property appraisal. Professional assessment. 4 months of advanced planning documented by a 9-year-old who'd been dismissed as background furniture. The man asked Uncle Brent about something called market comparables. Wren continued spooning cookie dough onto the baking sheet. I didn't know what that meant. It means they were figuring out how much the house was worth, I said. Children see everything adults think they've hidden 23 years investigating fraud taught me. Witnesses come in unexpected sizes. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the voice memo app, kept my tone light. You remember details so well, just like your mom. Can you tell me again about the measuring what date it was, what rooms they checked? Wren recited the timeline while decorating cookies. Saturday, March 18th, 2023. Spring break weekend. Clayton Kelsey arrived at 10 a.m. with professional equipment, spent 90 minutes documenting the property. Brent accompanied him to every room. They spoke about listing potential and renovation value. Clayton took 47 photographs Wren had counted because she'd been bored. 47 photographs. Professional appraisal documentation. Conspiracy planning that predated Charlotte's death by 3 months captured in a child's perfect recall. Can I do the frosting now? Wren asked. The interrogation concluded without her knowing she'd testified. You can do all of it, I said, saving the voice memo with timestamp and location data. Sunday evening, after Celeste picked up Wren, I opened Charlotte's bedroom safe. The envelope I'd filed March 14th, 2023, sat exactly where I'd placed it 16 weeks ago, sealed with packing tape that showed evidence of tampering. The label read in my handwriting, Exit Protocol 7 Steps. I'd written this the morning after Celeste called about the measuring, before Brent knew I knew, before the lock changes, before the surveillance cameras, before Floyd Lancaster knocked with 13 months of documentation. I drafted the entire strategy in 3 hours on a Wednesday morning in March, sealed it, and filed it as evidence that premeditation worked both directions. The envelope contained 7 pages outlining every action I would take if Brent moved against Charlotte. Step 1. Secure all financial documentation. Step 2. Coordinate with Vernon Dalton to verify trust protections. Step 3. Change all physical locks using commercial-grade deadbolts. Step 4. Install minimum 4-camera surveillance system with directional audio. Step 5. Secure witness testimony from all household observers. Step 6. Establish decoy accounts to document theft intent. Step 7. Coordinate filing with Attorney General's office within 72 hours. I'd followed the protocol exactly. The envelope was a time capsule I'd buried in his future, waiting for him to excavate his own reckoning. Brent's garment bag still hung in the guest bedroom closet, the luggage he'd abandoned Tuesday evening. I unzipped the interior lining, found the hidden compartment where expensive luggage stored valuables, slipped the sealed envelope inside and zipped it closed. He'd discover it eventually. Days or weeks from now, unpacking in whatever temporary housing he'd found, he'd feel the weight shift and investigate. He'd open the envelope dated March 14th, 2023, and realize every move he'd made had been anticipated 4 months before execution. He'd understand that while he'd been planning theft, I'd been planning documentation. While he'd been measuring walls, I'd been measuring him. He was the exhibit. He just didn't know the museum had opened 4 months ago. I was sealing the garment bag when headlights swept across the bedroom wall 8:47 p.m. on a Sunday night 3 days after the lockout. The surveillance app pinged motion detected front entrance. I opened the live feed and saw Brent's truck idling in the driveway, engine running, and this time he wasn't alone. 3 figures emerged, one carrying what looked like a locksmith's drill case. He'd brought reinforcements. He had no idea the cameras had been waiting 79 hours for exactly this moment. The locksmith had failed, the cameras had recorded everything. And by Monday morning when my phone rang, I knew the voice on the other end held the final piece. Sunday night at 8:47 p.m., 3 men had arrived with professional equipment. The locksmith mid-50s toolbox that weighed 40 pounds, based on how he carried it, spent 23 minutes examining the deadbolts I'd installed Wednesday morning. Floyd's cameras captured every angle. The directional audio recorded every word. These are bank grade, the locksmith said at 9:04 p.m., standing under the porch light with his diagnostic tools still in hand. You'll need court order. Brent's response came sharp. I have power of attorney. That is the court order. Not how it works, sir. They'd left at 9:11 p.m. Brent's truck, idling in reverse down the driveway, Clayton in the passenger seat, checking his phone, the locksmith riding in the back with his equipment, and the knowledge that whatever domestic situation he'd been hired for was beyond his professional scope. I'd saved the footage in 4 formats, logged the timestamps, added it to the evidence folder that had grown from 11 pages in June 2022 to 247 pages by Monday morning. The phone rang at 8:47 a.m. Caller ID showed a number I recognized: Lyle Quinn. Lyle Quinn, Celeste's ex-husband and still considered family 7 years after their cordial divorce, called at 8:47 Monday morning with the careful tone of someone holding explosive evidence. "I need to send you something," Lyle said. "Audio file. Legally recorded Georgia's one-party consent. Conversation I had with Brent on July 15th. July 15th, 13 days before the lockout. 13 days before Brent came home to keys that didn't work. What exactly did he say?" I asked. "Enough to bury him." Lyle explained while I pulled up my laptop, opened the encrypted email he was sending in real time. Brent had called, asking to borrow $15,000. Standard loan request between family members, except Lyle had been recording his calls since the divorce protection habit that had become routine. Georgia law permitted one-party consent recording. The conversation was legal evidence. He was relaxed, Lyle said, confident. He had no filter because he thought he was talking to Friendly Capital. The audio file loaded. I pressed play. Brent's voice came through clear, casual, the tone of someone discussing weekend plans rather than conspiracy to commit fraud. "House sale going through before New Year. We split equity. I clear ledger, everybody wins." There was background noise, restaurant sounds, silverware on plates. Brent had called from lunch, public setting, 0 operational security. The recording continued. "Breyer's handling Atlanta end. Clean 50-50 split once probate clears. I just need bridge capital to cover the gap until closing. $15,000 for 60 days. I'll pay you back with interest." Lyle's voice on the recording asked careful questions. How far along was probate? What was the property worth? Who was handling the legal work? Brent answered everything, building his own prosecution timeline with every casual sentence. "Timeline's tight but clean," Brent said on the recording. 3 months, maybe 4. Real estate market strong. Equity position is solid. We're talking $400,000 minimum after closing costs. $400,000. The house Charlotte had lived in for 32 years. The property she'd maintained with Russell for 2 decades before his death, reduced to equity calculation in a lunch conversation recorded 2 weeks before Brent tried to execute the liquidation. 23 years at First National taught me the best evidence comes from the target's own mouth, unguarded, on a Tuesday afternoon when they think they're just borrowing money from a friend. He had no idea I was documenting Lyle said live on the call. I sent him the loan by wire. Figured if he was legitimate, the money helped family. If he wasn't, the recording was insurance. "You'd testify if needed?" I asked. "Celeste is family. Charlotte was family. He stops here." Lyle transferred the file with full metadata, intact timestamp, showing July 15th, 2023, 1:47 p.m. geolocation data from the restaurant in Buckhead where Brent had been eating lunch, device ID verification, proving the recording's authenticity. The kind of evidence that survived chain of custody challenges because it had been legally captured with technical precision. I added it to the folder, page 248. Evening arrived with the kind of quiet that comes after construction finishes. 7:30 p.m. Monday, July 28, 2023. Vernon had filed the Attorney General dossier that morning, 248 pages of documentation covering 13 months of investigation. Celeste's geolocation match bank forensics showing every withdrawal timed to Brent's physical location. Dr. Prescott, Charlotte's internist for 16 years, had submitted a notarized affidavit documenting her mental competence through every medical visit from 2021 to 2023. Floyd's 13-month photographic archive, Lyle's audio confession, 4-camera surveillance system capturing locksmith attempt, Wren's testimony about March reconnaissance. Zero gaps remained. I stood in the living room before Russell's portrait, 21 years married, 3 years widowed, the man who taught me that protection meant preparation and boundaries meant enforcement. His frame hung where it had for 17 years positioned, so afternoon light caught the photograph at the angle that made his expression look like he was about to speak. "Tomorrow I take our boundary back," I said to the portrait, "like we always did together." Russell had made me promise at his deathbed: protect Charlotte, maintain family integrity, watch the boundaries we'd built together. I'd kept the promise for 3 years before Brent arrived. I'd kept it 13 months after Brent moved in. The boundary had bent but never broken. How long had it been since I'd slept before midnight, without checking camera feeds, without reviewing transaction logs, without running contingency scenarios? 13 months of defensive vigilance every night, ending with evidence review, and morning beginning with surveillance checks. I went to bed at 9:30 p.m., earliest in 13 months. No cameras to check Floyd's systems sent alerts if motion was detected. No evidence to review Vernon had filed everything that morning. No contingencies to plan every scenario had been documented and prepared. I slept 7 uninterrupted hours. No midnight alerts, no 3 a.m. contingency reviews, no dawn surveillance checks. First time since June 2022 that I'd let the night pass without watching. 13 months of his chaos. Tonight the silence was mine. I woke at 4:53 a.m. Tuesday to 17. Missed calls, all from Brent's number, all between midnight and 3 a.m. The voicemail started confident. "We need to talk about this like adults." By message 14, his voice had changed. Strained, urgent, barely controlled. The final voicemail, timestamped 2:47 a.m., contained only 9 words that told me everything had accelerated. "I know you filed something. Call me back." I didn't answer. The 17 calls didn't return the voicemails, and when his truck rumbled into the driveway at 6:07 that evening, I was ready. Tuesday unfolded in deliberate silence. Phone on Do Not Disturb voicemails, accumulating unheard, every system triple-checked. I reviewed camera angles at 8 a.m., tested the chain lock at noon, positioned my phone for optimal recording angle at 3 p.m. 23 years of fraud investigation distilled into single evening's confrontation architecture. 17 voicemails meant panic. Panic meant mistakes. Mistakes meant evidence. By 5:30 p.m., the house was ready. 4 cameras recording motion sensors, active chain lock, engaged evidence ledger positioned on the entry table where door gap would reveal it. I'd rehearsed the 6-inch opening calculated width that allowed visibility without physical access, conversation without contact. The surveillance app pinged at 6:07 p.m. motion detected driveway approach. 2 vehicles. Brent's truck leading unfamiliar sedan following Georgia Plates rental company sticker on the bumper. Both parked. I watched the exterior feed as Brent exited his truck, as the sedan's driver door opened, as a woman emerged in professional business attire. Breyer, 38, and dressed in professional Atlanta business attire, emerged from the sedan looking confused about why keys weren't working. Brent approached the front door with his key extended confident stride unchanged. He had no idea the locks had been replaced 4 days ago. He had no idea 4 cameras were capturing every frame in 4K resolution. "I don't know why she's not answering," Brent said to Breyer, voice carrying clear on the directional audio. "Just come inside, we'll figure this out." His key slid into the lock, turned, stopped halfway. On camera, I watched his expression shift. Confusion first, then calculation, then something harder. He tried again, forcing the turn. The commercial deadbolt held firm. "What the hell?" Brent muttered. He tried the side door. Camera 2 captured him rounding the corner, key ready, same result. Rear entrance camera 3, garage access camera 4. Every lock-eyed changed Wednesday morning, every entry point sealed with bank-grade security that his old keys couldn't breach. Breyer followed him from door-to-door, heels clicking on concrete confusion, growing with each failed attempt. "She changed the locks," Brent said at 6:11 p.m., standing at the garage entrance with his useless key still extended. "She actually changed the locks. You said she was in Baltimore," Breyer said, voice rising. You said we had time. Lorraine. Brent's fist hit the front door at 6:13 p.m. 3 strikes that registered on the motion sensor. Open this door. I waited 30 seconds. Let him hit the door twice more. Let the frustration build until his voice cracked with it. Then I disengaged the chain lock, partway 6 inches of steel remaining engaged, and opened the door exactly the calculated width. Backlit from interior light, I stood in the gap. Brent's expression shifted from anger to uncertainty. Breyer stood 3 feet behind him, professional composure intact, but eyes showing the first edge of doubt. "Hello, Brent," I said. "I believe we have things to discuss. You can't lock me out of my mother's house. I have power of attorney." Had past tense. Let me explain why. I lifted the ledger from the entry table, held it at the gap where both could see. Red highlighting visible on every page dollar amounts, circled dates marked. $78,000, I said. Documented. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every forged authorization. 13 months of theft from Charlotte's accounts while she was alive, while you lived in this house, while you claimed to be managing her care. That's not I was managing her finances. She authorized. Vernon Dalton has the originals. The Attorney General has copies. Brent's mouth closed. The bluster died mid-sentence. 23 years investigating fraud at First National taught me timing matters more than volume. The moment they realize the evidence exists is the moment they stop lying and start calculating. I pulled the second document from the entry table. Silver Pines Memory Care Admission. Packet, Brent's name on the application line. Charlotte's signature forged in his handwriting. Silver Pines Memory Care. I said, holding the packet to the gap. Application submitted May 2023 while Charlotte was still gardening independently. Facility deposit check drawn on her account without legitimate authorization. Breyer stepped forward for the first time. Silver Pines. What is she talking about? Breyer, she's twisting this isn't what it looks like, Brent said, turning toward her. It's exactly what it looks like, I said. Pre-planning institutionalization to gain full access to assets. Standard elder abuse pattern. Vernon has expert testimony prepared. I lifted the third document. Lyle Quinn's encrypted audio file, printed transcript, highlighted sections, marking every incriminating statement. $95,000, I said. That's what you owe Derek, Breyer's brother. Due December 31st, 2023. That's why you needed Charlotte's house sold before a new year. That's why the timeline was so tight. Breyer's face drained of color. You told me that loan was paid off. You said Derek was lying. I can explain, Brent started. Lyle Quinn recorded your phone call July 15th. I continued. You explained the whole plan. House sale equity split would clear the ledger. Your words, legally recorded. One-party consent state. How long have you been lying to me? Breyer asked, but she was staring at Brent, not me. He was afraid of the record, not of me. I lifted my phone, turned the screen toward the gap. 4 camera feeds, visible red recording indicators active in each corner. Live timestamp running, audio waveform showing real-time capture. 4 cameras, I said. 79 hours of footage. Every word you've spoken on this property since Wednesday, every failed lock attempt, every conversation, this confrontation included. Brent's expression shattered. He stared at the phone screen, at the camera feeds, at the red recording dots that meant everything he'd said was documented. You're recording this. His voice went thin. You can't. I already have, I said. 4 angles, directional audio, metadata intact, chain of custody documented. He stepped backward off the porch, nearly stumbling on the concrete step. Breyer turned to look at the cameras now visible under the eaves, professional installations that had been watching since Wednesday morning, documenting every arrival, every locksmith attempt, every panicked phone call. Brent turned without another word, walked to his truck, but didn't open the door. Instead, he stood there silhouetted in the driveway's motion sensor light phone, pressed to his ear. Breyer remained on the porch staring at the cameras, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried clear on the directional audio. How long have you been lying to me? I watched through the 6-inch gap as her question hung unanswered as Brent's phone call connected as his first words registered. "Clayton, we have a problem. She knows about Derek." Breyer's question, "How long have you been lying to me?" hung unanswered in the summer air while I did what 23 years of fraud investigation taught me. I spoke to the witness, not the target. Brent paced the driveway, screaming into his phone, words bleeding together in panic. I ignored him. "Breyer," I said through the 6-inch gap. "Look at me, not the cameras." She turned slowly, professional composure cracked but not shattered. Tears tracked mascara down her face. "I didn't know about Derek," she said, voice trembling. "I swear I didn't know he still owed—" "I believe you," I said. "But there's something else you need to know." I held up the Silver Pines admission packet, angling it so she could read the facility name. Silver Pines Memory Care. Application submitted May 2023. Charlotte's signature forged. He was planning to institutionalize her to liquidate this house. Breyer's expression shifted. "But she's not Charlotte Gardens. She drove herself to appointments in April. I saw her planting tomatoes." "I know. Dr. Prescott's affidavit confirms full mental competence through July 2023. Charlotte didn't need memory care. She needed protection from the person claiming to provide it." Breyer wrapped her arms around herself despite the evening heat. "Silver Pines requires family consensus for admission," I continued. "Facility won't accept patients without documented agreement from immediate family." I pulled the second page from my folder, held it to the gap. Family consensus form official letterhead signatures in black ink. "Your signature, March 14th, 2023. Family consensus for memory care placement." Breyer stared at the form. Her hand came up to her mouth. "I thought he said it was insurance," she whispered. "Long-term care policy. I signed it after working 14 hours. Kitchen table, stack of papers. I didn't read—" "You were tired. He counted on that." Breyer looked at her right hand like it had betrayed her. "Family consensus. I gave him family consensus to institutionalize his own mother." "You didn't give consent. You were deceived into signing. That's different." "Is it—" She sat down on the porch steps, hand still covering her mouth. "Every document she said to no one. Every time he said, 'Just sign here, babe, it's routine.' Every authorization I thought was helping manage his mother's care." 23 years investigating fraud taught me the difference between perpetrators and pawns. Perpetrators rehearse their lies. Pawns discover them in real time on someone else's porch. Brent ended his call with Clayton turned to see Breyer on the steps, me, still watching from the doorway. His face went red. "You can't do this," he screamed, crossing the lawn. "This is illegal lockout, elder abuse." He pulled his phone out, fingers stabbing at the screen. "I'm calling the police. You think your cameras mean anything? Wait until they see what you've done." He dialed. I waited. "I need police at 847 Oakmont Drive," Brent said when the dispatcher answered. "My aunt is refusing medical care. She's barricaded herself inside my mother's house. She's 71, possibly experiencing dementia episode, won't let family access property." The cameras kept recording. Breyer looked up at Brent with an expression I couldn't name. "I'll wait right here," I said through the gap. Police cruiser arrived at 6:35 p.m. Officer Wade Townsend, 28 years with Charlotte Metro Police, and 15 minutes from shift end, approached the scene expecting standard family dispute. Brent met him at the curb, gestures animated. "Officer, thank God. My aunt locked me out of my mother's house. I have power of attorney. She's revoked it without cause. My mother's in the hospital and needs documents." "Sir, slow down," Officer Townsend said, hand raised. "Let's take this one step at a time." He approached the porch where I still stood in the doorway gap. "Ma'am, I need you to step outside so we can discuss this situation." "Officer, I'm the legal resident and property manager," I said. "I'll be happy to show you documentation inside where my legal brief is organized." "She can't invite you in," Brent screamed from the driveway. "That's my mother's house." Officer Townsend looked at Brent, then at me, then at Breyer, still sitting on the steps with mascara-stained face. "Ma'am, if you have documentation, I'd like to see it," he said. I opened the door, fully disengaged the chain, and stepped aside. Officer Townsend entered. The door closed behind him. Inside took 7 minutes. I showed him the deed proving Charlotte's sole ownership. Medical power of attorney revocation dated July 22, 2023, with Dr. Prescott's witness signature. Attorney General filing receipt. Photographic evidence of unauthorized account access. Audio recording transcript. Surveillance archive summary. This is comprehensive, Officer Townsend said. Attorney General filing receipt dated Monday morning. Submitted 8:47 a.m. yesterday. Case number 2023-EF-8847. Ma'am, you're more prepared than most attorneys I've worked with. 23 years at First National, Fraud Investigation Division. He nodded, slowly closed the folder, handed it back. We stepped onto the porch together. Brent stood in the driveway, arms crossed. Breyer hadn't moved from the steps. Mr. Mercer, Officer Townsend said, you're a licensee whose permission to occupy this property has been legally revoked. You need to step away from the residence. You can't do this. This is illegal. Brent exploded, voice cracking under the weight of a man who just watched his entire plan collapse in a doorway. This house should have been ours a year ago anyway. The words hung in the air, Officer Townsend's body cam recording light visible on his chest, Floyd's directional microphone capturing audio from the eaves, my doorbell camera streaming. He wrote the state's opening statement himself in front of 3 cameras. Sir, Officer Townsend said, voice hardening, I need you to calm down and step back from the residence. You can't tell me to leave my own. This is not your property, sir. The documentation is clear. You need to leave now. Brent opened his mouth to argue again when headlights swept across the lawn, a third vehicle moving too fast, braking hard in the street. Clayton Kelsey emerged before the engine stopped, phone still pressed to his ear, and the first words out of his mouth, carried clear on every microphone. Brent, shut up and get in the truck. My attorney says not another word on this property. But Brent had already said enough. The timestamps would show he kept talking for another 43 seconds. Vernon's call came 2 weeks after the confrontation, and the first thing he said was, his name isn't Brent. I sat in the Dalton and Associates conference room mid-August, watching Vernon spread documents across the table like evidence of something worse than we'd imagined. The investigation had shifted from prosecution preparation to forensic archaeology, digging through layers of identity to find what was buried underneath. Credit history dead ends at 22 months, Vernon said. That's not someone with bad credit, that's someone who erased their credit. Name change, I asked. Brian Kelsey became Brandon Cole, April 2022, 2 months before he moved in with Charlotte. The legal filing sat on top of the stack, petition for name change filed March 2022, granted April 2022. Brian Michael Kelsey requesting legal name change to Brandon Michael Cole, citing personal preference and fresh start following divorce. Standard procedure, clean record, judge approved without question. He scrubbed his history, Vernon continued. New driver's license, new social security card cross-reference, new credit file. Anyone running background check on Brandon Cole in June 2022 would find blank slate. Charlotte never knew she was vetting a ghost, I said. Vernon pulled the second document from his stack. Marriage license, June 2018. Brian Michael Kelsey and Saskia Marie Redmond. Divorce decree, September 2021. 3 years, 4 months. The divorce filing contained language that made my investigator training go, cold allegations of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, isolation tactics. 3-year marriage dissolved, September 2021, Vernon said. Financial abuse allegations in divorce filing. Charges filed, I asked. None, she just wanted out. The property settlement showed Saskia received nothing, walked away with personal belongings, clothing her vehicle. No equity split, no asset division, just escape. She paid to leave, I said. Vernon nodded. And 6 months later, he changed his name and found Charlotte. The third document made the pattern undeniable. Bank record subpoena account, owned by Pauline Mercer, Saskia's mother, age 70 at the time, deceased May 2023. $31,000 withdrawn over 18 months, 2019 to 2021. Power of attorney signature, Brian M. Kelsey. Pauline Mercer, Vernon said. Saskia's mother, 31,000 over 18 months. Same pattern. I asked, though I already knew. Identical. Power of attorney obtained within months of establishing residence. Systematic withdrawals, memory care facility threats documented in emails he sent to Saskia, claiming her mother needed professional supervision. When did Pauline die? May 2023, 3 months ago. Natural causes, but her final year was spent believing her daughter was trying to institutionalize her, while her son-in-law protected her interests. The conference room door opened. Vernon's assistant set up the video conference screen tested audio-confirmed connection. At 2 p.m. exactly, the screen populated with a woman's face. Professional office background, neutral expression that couldn't hide the tension around her eyes. Saskia Redmond, 36, and working as a forensic accountant in Savannah, appeared on Vernon's video screen looking like someone who'd been waiting 3 years to tell this story. Ms. Redmond, Vernon said, thank you for joining us. I've been expecting this call since I saw the name change filing, Saskia said. I knew he would find someone else. Her voice carried the controlled calm of someone who'd processed trauma into data, converted pain into documentation. Can you tell us about your mother's relationship with Brian Kelsey? Vernon asked. He moved in with my mother 6 months after we married, Saskia said. Said her house was closer to his work. I thought it was practical. She had the space he'd save on rent. She'd have someone checking on her. You didn't suspect I started. Not until the bank statements started disappearing. By then, he'd convinced her I was trying to institutionalize her, that I wanted her house, that I was jealous of their bond. 23 years investigating fraud taught me the difference between criminals and predators. Criminals see opportunities, predators create them. He has a signature tactic, Saskia continued. Accuse family members of exactly what he's doing. He'd tell my mother I wanted to place her in memory care while he was submitting facility applications. He'd claim I was stealing from her accounts while he was withdrawing thousands. Creates confusion, isolates the victim. Projection, I said. Weaponized projection, Saskia corrected. When my mother's health declined naturally in 2021, he blamed my interference. Said my stress was making her sick. She died believing I was the threat. The screen showed Saskia's composure cracking slightly. She looked down, collected herself, continued. After the divorce, after the name change, I searched for him monthly. I knew this isn't opportunistic, it's how he survives. I waited to see which elderly woman's obituary would mention devoted caretaker Brandon Cole. You've been tracking him? Vernon asked. Every month. Public records, obituaries, property transfers. When I saw Charlotte Mercer's hospital admission July 2023 with Brandon Cole listed as emergency contact, I recognized the pattern. I started documenting before your subpoena arrived. You knew he would target someone else, I said. I'm only sorry I didn't find her first, Saskia said quietly. The video call ended at 2:47 p.m. Saskia's face disappeared from the screen, leaving Vernon and me in the conference room with documents proving what we'd suspected. Charlotte wasn't an isolated victim. She was the latest target in a serial operation. 2 victims we've documented, Vernon said. How many others between Pauline and Charlotte, and how many before Pauline, I added. How many Paulines were there between 2000 and 2018 that we'd never find? Vernon organized the documents into chronological order. Brian Kelsey married Saskia June 2018, moved in with Pauline by December 2018, 31,000, extracted by August 2021, divorced Saskia September 2021, changed name to Brandon Cole, April 2022, moved in with Charlotte June 2022, pattern repeated with industrial precision. This changes the prosecution strategy entirely, Vernon said. We're not prosecuting a family dispute anymore, I said. We're tearing down an enterprise. Saskia's follow-up email arrived at 7:43 that evening, subject line, additional documentation. Inside, scanned pages from her mother's 2020 journal entries describing Brian's friend from college who needed temporary housing, a man named Derek who'd helped measure the house for insurance purposes, who'd discussed property values, who'd mentioned his brother was a real estate appraiser. Pauline had written the date March 2020. The pattern went back further than Charlotte. It went back further than Pauline. The state attorney general's senior investigator spread the tracking chart across the conference table, and I counted 3 states, 7 cities, and 11 red pins before he said the words I'd been waiting to hear: Clayton Kelsey is the architect. Marcus Coleman, senior investigator with the state attorney general's financial crimes division for 16 years, had the weary precision of someone who'd seen every variation of human predation. He positioned the interstate tracking chart so Vernon and I could see the full scope red pins marking properties across Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, lines connecting them in chronological sequence, dates annotated beside each location. 7 cities, 3 states, pattern consistency, 97%, Marcus said. Widowed homeowners, unmortgaged property, sudden cohabitation arrangements, systematic asset depletion. How far back, I asked. Earliest documented case, 2016, 8 years of operation. 8 years. While I'd been investigating check fraud and embezzlement at First National, Clayton Kelsey had been building an interstate syndicate targeting vulnerable elderly women with industrial efficiency. Marcus pulled a second document from his folder. Corporate registration for Kelsey Capital Solutions established 2015. Licensed private lending business, legitimate front operation, providing small business loans and financial consulting. Clayton Kelsey, 47 years old, licensed real estate appraiser, small business lending credentials, Marcus said. Uses lending consultations to identify targets, widows with unmortgaged property, isolated social networks, adult children living distant. Evaluates their financial vulnerability while pretending to evaluate their refinancing options. He evaluates their property while evaluating their vulnerability, Vernon said. Exactly. Lending consultation becomes surveillance operation. Once he identifies viable target, he creates chance encounter opportunities for younger brother Brian, now Brandon Cole, to enter their life. Brian poses as helpful, neighbor-concerned friend, eventually caretaker. Relationship escalates to cohabitation. Power of attorney obtained, systematic extraction begins. The chart showed the pattern repeating across 8 years like assembly line production. Identify, insert, extract, liquidate, move to next target. Assets liquidated through shell corporations. Marcus continued. Proceeds split 50-50. Clayton handles money laundering. Brian handles victim management. Division of labor refined over multiple iterations. How many confirmed victims? I asked. Marcus flipped to the victim documentation page. 3 names highlighted in yellow indicating verified cases with recovered evidence. 3 verified across state lines before Charlotte. We suspect more. 23 years investigating fraud taught me the difference between opportunists and architects. Opportunists react to circumstances. Architects build systems that create circumstances. Margaret Sheffield, Marcus read. Asheville, North Carolina, $89,000 extracted over 14 months, 2016 to 2017. Died of natural causes 3 weeks after family filed elder abuse complaint. Investigation closed due to victim death. Helen Whitmore, Charleston, South Carolina, $127,000 over 23 months, 2017 to 2019. Institutionalized in memory care facility before prosecution possible. Diagnosed with dementia 6 months after Brian, then using his birth name, moved out. Pauline Mercer, Savannah, Georgia, $31,000 over 18 months, 2019 to 2021. Died May 2023, 3 months ago. Daughter Saskia Redmond provided documentation after learning about Charlotte case. Marcus looked up from the page. Combined $347,000 from 3 verified victims in the most recent documented cases. Charlotte would have been next in line, but she wasn't alone, and neither were the 49 before her. Would have been, I said. FBI Financial Crimes Unit is now lead agency. Interstate racketeering triggers federal jurisdiction. Your evidence package provided foundation for multi-state investigation. Marcus pulled audio equipment from his briefcase, connected it to the conference room speakers. Lyle Quinn's July 15th recording, he said. But there's a second segment you haven't heard yet. The audio started with Brandon's voice discussing the house sale timeline with Lyle, the conversation I'd already reviewed. But then the recording continued past where the previous copy had ended. Background noise shifted, car door closing, engine starting. Then Brandon's voice again, different tone on a phone call. Lyle said no, which means we're on our own for the December 31st deadline. Clayton's voice came through clear on speakerphone. House liquidation before a new year. Split equity, clear ledger, move on. What about the family doctor Prescott refused to sign HIPAA authorization for Silver Pines? Doctor refused HIPAA bypass him. Work with Silver Pines intake coordinator directly. They require medical assessment, Brandon said. Not for assessment intake, just need family consensus and deposit. We have both. The recording continued for another 40 seconds, Clayton detailing exactly how to circumvent medical verification requirements, which intake staff member to contact, how much deposit would expedite placement, blueprint for institutionalizing someone without legitimate medical necessity. They'd built an assembly line for stealing lives, and Charlotte was supposed to be another unit rolling off the belt. Silver Pines is under separate investigation, Marcus said when the recording ended. Accepting residents without proper medical verification, taking deposits from unauthorized representatives. Your sister's case exposed institutional corruption we suspected but couldn't prove. How many residents are there illegitimately? Vernon asked. We're auditing every admission from the past 5 years. Marcus organized the documentation into a final summary folder. Federal arrest warrants, charge sheets, evidence indexes, the machinery of justice compiled into paper. Federal arrest warrants issued this morning, Marcus said. Clayton Kelsey and Brandon Cole, birth name, Brian Kelsey. Charges include interstate racketeering, elder financial exploitation conspiracy to commit fraud money, laundering through corporate shells. When do they execute? Vernon asked. Coordinated arrests scheduled for Thursday dawn, FBI leading. Simultaneous raids on Clayton's business office and Brandon's current residence. Breyer listed as potential witness rather than co-conspirator based on your family consensus form deception evidence. Thursday, I said. 3 days. Federal agents are already positioning. We don't expect flight risk they don't know we've connected the interstate operation. I stood in the AG office parking lot at 4:17 p.m., watching Marcus Coleman drive away with the arrest warrant folder, and I pulled out my phone. Charlotte answered on the second ring from her hospital room voice, stronger than I'd heard in months. Lorraine. I kept my tone level professional the way I'd delivered news to fraud victims for 23 years. Charlotte, the federal government is arresting Clayton and Brandon Thursday morning. Your home is secure, your assets are protected, and their streak ends right here. The silence lasted 6 seconds before I heard her whisper, how many others were there before me? The civil lawsuit arrived by certified mail on September 14th, 2 weeks after federal arrest warrants issued, and the dollar amount $200,000 told me everything I needed to know about desperation. I'd answered Charlotte's question that evening in August the only way I could with the truth. 3 verified victims before her: Margaret Sheffield, Helen Whitmore, Pauline Mercer. $347,000 extracted over 8 years through identical patterns. Charlotte had listened in silence from her hospital bed, processing the reality that she wasn't a family tragedy, but a business model. She'd hung up without another word. The next morning, she called back with a voice I recognized from 23 years of fraud victims who'd converted grief into resolve. What do we do next? What came next was this Brandon Cole's defense attorney filing suit alleging wrongful eviction, breach of tenancy rights, intentional infliction of emotional distress. 23 pages of legal intimidation wrapped in certified mail packaging, delivered while federal racketeering charges were pending. I read it standing in the driveway. Wrongful eviction causing severe emotional trauma and reputational harm. He wrote that with a straight face while his client sat in custody awaiting trial for interstate elder exploitation. I called Vernon at 3:47 p.m. Slap suit, Vernon said before I finished reading the first page aloud. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. Classic white-collar criminal defense tactic. Explain. They're not trying to win. They're trying to drain you into withdrawal, bury you in legal costs, force settlement, create leverage for criminal charge withdrawal. These suits rarely succeed, but they achieve purpose through financial attrition. Cost estimate, I asked. 40 to 60,000 in defense costs if it goes to trial. More if they appeal. They're betting you'll settle for 20, maybe 30, to make it disappear. What's the counter? Anti-slap motion. Prove the suit is retaliation for legitimate criminal complaint. If we win, they pay your attorney fees and face sanctions for frivolous filing. I looked at the lawsuit in my hand at the signature of Brandon Cole's attorney at the filing date that coincided exactly with the week federal arrest warrants became public record. I spent 23 years watching this playbook, I said. File anti-slap motion tomorrow. Attach federal warrants as exhibits. Include the 4-camera footage witness testimonies, AG investigation summary. Everything. Counterclaim for malicious prosecution, Vernon asked. Everything. Don't let them breathe. September bled into October through legal maneuvering motion filings, procedural delays, hearing extensions. Anti-slap hearing, scheduled October 17th. Brandon's attorney filed for continuances, requested discovery extensions, deployed every delay tactic available. I maintained routine at Oakmont Drive surveillance system checks, twice daily evidence files, organized by date and category hospital visits with Charlotte every afternoon. Waiting. 23 years at First National taught me that criminals escalate predictably. When legal pressure mounts, they don't get smarter under stress, they get louder. Friday, October 13th, 2:14 a.m. Shattering glass jolted me awake. The surveillance tablet sat on my nightstand screen, illuminating in the darkness. 4 camera feeds displayed simultaneously. Motion detected driveway front yard. Figure visible in infrared adult male unsteady gait. Aluminum baseball bat swinging at mailbox. Truck idling in street driver's door, open engine running. Brandon Cole. Heavily intoxicated based on movement pattern. The bat connected with the mailbox on the 3rd swing metal crumpling post, bending. I stayed in bed, tablet in hand, watching. He's drunk, he's angry, and he has no idea what he's giving me. Camera 2 captured him approaching the garage with spray paint can. Red paint profanity spelled in uneven letters across the white door. His face clearly visible under motion sensor lighting, every detail recorded in 4K resolution with timestamp running. Camera 3 tracked him to the front door. Crowbar in hand, now prying at the commercial deadbolt. The steel held. He struck the door with the crowbar once, twice, 3 times. Directional microphone captured every word he screamed. You think you won? You think this is over? Another strike. The deadbolt didn't move. $200,000, you'll lose everything. Keep talking. The microphones are directional. He kicked the garage door, attempted prying the living room window with the crowbar. Frame held hurricane-rated installation from 2019. Paint can thrown at the house, red splatter across brick. License plate visible in camera. 4 Georgia JKM 4739 illuminated perfectly by driveway motion sensors. 4 minutes of vandalism. 4 cameras documenting every frame. Facial recognition software would identify him in seconds, but I didn't need software. I'd known exactly who it was the moment the glass broke. I called 911 at 2:19 a.m. voice level and professional. Intoxicated male armed with aluminum bat actively vandalizing property. License plate visible on camera, Georgia JKM 4739. Are you in immediate danger? The operator asked. I'm inside, doors secured. He's outside. I have him on 4 cameras. Units dispatched. Stay inside, stay on the line. Brandon fled at 2:20 a.m., stumbling back to his truck bat, thrown in the bed tires, squealing as he accelerated away. Camera 1 captured departure angle, timestamp direction of travel. Officer Wade Townsend arrived at 2:23 a.m. I opened the door 6 inches chain, still engaged, and held up my tablet showing all 4 camera feeds. Ma'am, you can send me that footage, he asked. Already uploading to cloud. You'll have access in 2 minutes. He reviewed the footage on his phone while standing on my porch, watching Brandon's face in perfect clarity, listening to threats captured with directional audio. Second units locating the vehicle now, Officer Townsend said at 2:27 a.m. His radio crackled at 2:29. Suspect vehicle located 3 blocks north, driver still behind wheel. At 2:31 a.m., suspect in custody. 0:47 hours, DUI, vandalism, criminal trespassing, restraining order violation. His freedom officially over at 2:31 a.m., 3 blocks from the house he'd tried to steal. I watched the tablet screen as Officer Townsend's body camera transmitted the arrest handcuffs. Closing Miranda rights read Brandon's slurred protests about wrongful persecution, captured for permanent record. Vernon called at 7:53, that morning, voice tight with something between satisfaction and disbelief. Slap suit dismissed. Judge reviewed the arrest footage, called it compelling evidence of malicious intent, sanctioned his attorney for frivolous filing. He paused, papers rustling. Lorraine, there's something else. FBI executed the federal warrants Thursday dawn. Clayton in Atlanta, Brandon in holding here. But when they searched Clayton's office at Kelsey Capital Solutions, they found a file cabinet, 47 folders, 47 names. The number hit like a freight train, not 3 verified victims, not 4 including Charlotte. 47. The federal courthouse smelled like floor polish and precedent, and when Brandon Cole entered the courtroom at 8:53 that morning in shackles and orange jumpsuit, he had no idea his brother was being arrested 300 miles away. 47 folders. The number had occupied my mind since Vernon's call revealing the file cabinet discovery. 47 names, 47 families, 47 lives cataloged like inventory in Clayton Kelsey's office. The morning after that revelation, I'd stood in Charlotte's hospital room while she processed the scope. Not a family tragedy, an assembly line. She was unit number 48 on the production schedule. U.S. District Court, Charlotte, November 2023. Federal preliminary hearing for United States versus Brandon Cole, case number 323-CR-00847. Vernon and I sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table. Brandon had been in custody since October 13th, when Officer Townsend arrested him 3 blocks from Oakmont Drive with red paint still on his hands. His attorney filed another continuance motion last night, Vernon whispered as Brandon's defense counsel arrived at 8:47, briefcase, heavy expression, exhausted. Emergency circumstances. Denied, I asked. Magistrate ruled at 7 this morning. Hearing proceeds as scheduled. U.S. Magistrate Judge Rebecca Thornton, appointed to the federal bench in 2018 after 20 years as a federal prosecutor, entered at precisely 9 o'clock with the bearing of someone who'd seen every criminal defense tactic twice. All rise, the bailiff called. We stood. Brandon stood, last chains rattling. United States versus Brandon Cole. Case 323, criminal 00847, Judge Thornton said. Mr. Cole, you're charged with elder financial exploitation, interstate wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and money laundering. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor, Brandon said, voice steadier than his hands. The assistant U.S. attorney rose, a woman in her 40s with the precise economy of someone who'd prosecuted hundreds of federal cases. Your Honor, the government has identified 49 victims, spanning 2008, to present with Charlotte Mercer as the 50th, the one who broke the chain. Aggregate theft documented at $2.3 million across 8 years of systematic interstate exploitation. We request the defendant be held without bail as extreme flight risk. $2.3 million. The number landed like a verdict itself. Charlotte's case represented roughly 3% of the total damage. Margaret Sheffield, Helen Whitmore, Pauline Mercer, all of them together barely scratched the surface of the operation's full scope. At 9:14 a.m., Marcus Coleman entered through the rear courtroom door. He approached the prosecution table, leaned toward the assistant U.S. attorney, whispered something that made her nod and stand immediately. Then Marcus turned toward Vernon and me, crossed to our row, leaned down. Clayton Kelsey taken into custody, Atlanta headquarters, 9:12 a.m., Marcus said in undertone. Joint FBI Georgia Task Force, federal warrant executed. My hand found Vernon's arm. The network was collapsing in real time. Same charges, I whispered. Conspiracy to commit bank fraud, interstate wire fraud, racketeering, Marcus said. He's the architect. Charges go deeper. At the bench, the assistant U.S. attorney requested sidebar. Judge Thornton waved both attorneys forward. The conference lasted 90 seconds, voices too low for gallery to hear. Judge Thornton returned to the bench with an expression that suggested the morning had just become more interesting. The court has been informed that co-defendant Clayton Kelsey was arrested in Atlanta at 9:12 this morning on federal racketeering charges related to this matter. Brandon's face drained of color. His head snapped toward his attorney, who looked equally shocked. What? Brandon said, audible across the courtroom. When? His defense attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, I request immediate recess to consult with my client regarding these developments. 23 years investigating fraud taught me that criminal networks don't collapse gradually. They shatter all at once when the architect falls and every supporting wall comes down with him. Request denied, Judge Thornton said. This is a coordinated federal investigation spanning multiple jurisdictions. Your client has had adequate time to prepare defense. The government is ready to proceed. Your Honor, the scope has expanded dramatically. The defense attorney started. The scope expanded when your client and his brother victimized 47 elderly Americans over 8 years. Judge Thornton interrupted. Motion denied. We proceed. Brandon stared at the table, hands clenched in his lap chains, limiting movement. The calculation was visible on his face. His brother arrested the network, exposed the evidence, compiled across 8 years of meticulous FBI investigation. No more contingency plans, no more exit strategies. The assistant U.S. attorney addressed bail. Your Honor, defendant legally changed his name in 2022 to evade detection. Birth name Brian Kelsey, currently using Brandon Cole. He operated across state lines, victimized elderly women systematically, and has demonstrated sophisticated understanding of asset concealment through corporate shells. Extreme flight risk. Government requests no bail. Defense counsel argued community ties, no passport willingness to cooperate. The argument sounded hollow against the weight of 47 victim folders and $2.3 million in documented theft. Bail set at $500,000 cash, Judge Thornton said. No property bonds accepted. Defendant remanded to federal custody pending trial. Your Honor, my client cannot post cash bail of that amount, defense counsel started. Then your client will remain in federal custody, Judge Thornton said, which seems appropriate given the circumstances. The December deadline no longer mattered. U.S. Marshals approached Brandon's table at 9:47 a.m. He stood when directed, turned toward the exit, and in that moment his eyes scanned the gallery. Found me in the third row. No words exchanged, just recognition. He knew who had built the case that collapsed his 8-year operation. Then the marshals led him through the door, and he was gone. Outside the courthouse, Vernon checked his phone on the steps. Clayton's bail hearing is 2 p.m. in Atlanta, he said. FBI froze all Kelsey Capital Solutions accounts this morning, corporate shells, personal accounts, everything. The December 31st deadline, I started. The $95,000 debt to Derek the House liquidation timeline that had driven every decision since June 2022. The pressure that had made Brandon desperate enough to vandalize property at 2:14 a.m. on October 13th. Doesn't matter anymore, Vernon finished. They're not making any deadlines from federal custody. Vernon's phone buzzed as we reached the parking garage email from Marcus Coleman with subject line Victim Notification Protocol. Attached preliminary contact list for all 47 victim families, FBI coordination schedule, restitution calculation methodology. But the final paragraph stopped me cold. Additional investigation has identified 3 potential victims from 2008 to 2012 period, predating Kelsey Capital Solutions formation. Names: Evelyn Blackwood, deceased 2010, Ruth Carmichael, deceased 2012, Dorothy Hayes, institutionalized 2011, deceased 2014. Total confirmed and estimated victim count 50, spanning 15 years. Charlotte was the 50th. The assembly line had been running longer than anyone knew. Brandon Cole stood before Judge Thornton at 10:47 that morning and said the 2 words that ended 15 years of predation: "Guilty, Your Honor." 50 victims. The email from Marcus Coleman had confirmed the expanded investigation: Evelyn Blackwood, Ruth Carmichael, Dorothy Hayes from the pre-2012 period, plus additional cases under review. 15 years of systematic exploitation, 50 families cataloged like inventory, $2.3 million documented and climbing. The scope had expanded beyond what anyone imagined when I'd first opened Charlotte's laptop that midnight in June 2022. Now Brandon stood in federal court facing evidence too comprehensive to challenge 4-camera 4K vandalism footage, Lyle Quinn's audio recordings, Floyd Lancaster's 13-month photographic archive, 47-plus victim files, FBI interstate investigation documentation. His attorney had negotiated the only rational option. "Mr. Cole, how do you plead to count 1 elder financial exploitation?" Judge Thornton asked. "Guilty, Your Honor." "Count 2 interstate wire fraud." "Guilty, Your Honor." "Count 3 conspiracy to commit bank fraud." "Guilty, Your Honor." 3 guilty pleas, 3 federal charges carrying maximum 30 years each. Clayton was entering identical pleas in Atlanta the same morning, coordinated prosecution across jurisdictions. "And you understand this plea carries maximum sentence of 30 years federal imprisonment?" Judge Thornton asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Brandon said, voice barely audible. Judge Thornton reviewed the plea agreement terms negotiated with prosecution. 36 months federal incarceration, 5 years supervised release upon completion, $78,000 restitution to Charlotte Mercer, the documented theft from her accounts over 13 months, permanent protective order barring contact with all identified victims or victim families. Additional restitution proceedings pending for remaining 46 documented victims. Your Honor, the assistant U.S. attorney added, coordinated civil cases across 3 states. Permanent protective order, Judge Thornton said. No contact with any victim or victim family members. Violation constitutes separate federal offense. Do you understand, Mr. Cole? Yes, Your Honor. Federal sentencing guidelines require 85% minimum service. No parole eligibility. You will serve at least 30 months before release consideration. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Justice quantified in months and dollars measured against 15 years of calculated theft. Victim impact statements, Judge Thornton said. The courtroom screen illuminated. Saskia Redmond appeared via video link from Savannah, 36 years old and steady, in a way that came from processing trauma into testimony. My mother, Pauline Mercer, lost $31,000 to this man, Saskia said. Lost her home. Died in an unlicensed memory care facility May 2023, believing her daughter was her enemy and her son-in-law was her protector. Brandon stared at the defense table throughout, never looked at the screen, never looked up. This wasn't financial misstep or poor judgment, Saskia continued. This was calculated harvest of vulnerable human lives. He measured my mother's vulnerability the same way his brother measured her house professionally, systematically with tools designed for assessment. Her voice never wavered, no tears, no hesitation, just clear testimony of predation documented across 18 months. I want the court to understand he knew exactly what he was doing, and he would still be doing it if Ms. Mercer hadn't stopped him. The screen went dark. Saskia's statement concluded at 4 minutes 11 seconds. Judge Thornton looked toward the gallery. Ms. Mercer, would you like to address the court? I stood. No, Your Honor, the evidence speaks. 23 years investigating fraud taught me that justice isn't satisfying. It's exhausting, procedural, and measured in months when the damage took minutes. Judge Thornton nodded. Indeed it does. She delivered final remarks from the bench voice carrying the weight of federal authority, unprecedented scope, of interstate operation, sophisticated exploitation tactics, vulnerable victim selection, systematic asset theft spanning 15 years. She emphasized the deterrent message to other predators targeting elderly Americans. This court has reviewed cases involving financial exploitation, Judge Thornton said. None approach the calculated systematic predation demonstrated here. You identified vulnerable elderly women, inserted yourself into their lives through manufactured relationships, extracted their assets through fraudulent authorization, and moved to the next victim. Brandon remained standing, hands folded, expression empty. 36 months federal imprisonment, Judge Thornton pronounced. Defendant remanded immediately. U.S. Marshals approached at 11:34 a.m. Brandon turned toward them without protest, hands extended for restraints. The courtroom door closed behind him at 11:37 a.m., and he was gone. I returned to Oakmont Drive at 6:47 p.m. Charlotte had been discharged from the hospital 3 days prior, staying temporarily at Celeste's house during home reclamation. The house felt different, now reclaimed space, not violated space. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table with documents Vernon had prepared, restitution paperwork, protective order copies, estate restoration plan, 13 months of invasion, 3 hours of sentencing, 36 months of consequence. Celeste arrived at 8:23 p.m. Her divorce from Lyle had finalized the previous week, 7 years of cordial separation converted to legal closure. She sat across the oak table, hands wrapped around the coffee mug I'd poured. "Mom, I am so deeply sorry," she said. "I should have seen it. I should have questioned more. That family consensus form I signed it exhausted after 14 hours, and I didn't read it, and I gave him exactly what he needed to. You were tired," I said. He counted on that. "But I should have been less tired. I should have been more vigilant." I reached across the table, placed my hand over hers. "I love you. That is absolute. But love does not mean I will allow excuses or blindness to cross my perimeter again. We rebuild slowly, piece by piece, with honesty. Deal." Celeste's tears were real this time, not performance, not exhaustion, but genuine reckoning. "Can it be saved?" she asked. "Us, I mean, the trust. Trust isn't rebuilt like a wall. It's regrown like a garden, season by season, with vigilance and care." "We'll find out," I said. "One conversation at a time." They talked until 11:17 p.m. about Wren's upcoming 9th birthday, about Charlotte's physical therapy progress, about the old radio Russell had been restoring in the garage before he died. Celeste asked if I would help finish it, teach her the soldering. Russell had tried to teach her 20 years ago. I said yes. And when Celeste left at 11:23, I walked to the garage, pulled the dust cover off Russell's workbench, and found his restoration journal still open to the last page he'd written. "Some things take longer than one lifetime to fix. That's what family is, for finishing each other's work." The federal prosecutor asked when I first suspected systematic crime, and my answer delivered from the witness stand on November 22nd changed how everyone in that courtroom understood the previous 13 months, the second week. Russell's restoration journal had guided me through November. Celeste and I spent evenings in the garage learning the soldering he'd tried to teach her 20 years ago, his notes walking us through circuits and connections. Some things take longer than one lifetime to fix. That's what family is, for finishing each other's work. By the time I testified at the additional federal sentencing hearing, I understood what he meant. "Ms. Mercer, when did you first suspect your sister was victim of systematic financial exploitation?" the federal prosecutor asked. "The second week after he moved in, June 2023, the gallery murmured. Brandon's head snapped up from the defense table, staring. 13 months. He'd lived in Charlotte's house, believing himself undetected for 13 months, while I documented every transaction, every manipulation, every calculated theft. "But you didn't report suspicions for 13 months, the prosecutor continued. "Why, allegation without ironclad evidence is liability," I said. "Creates reasonable doubt, escape routes. Character defense opportunities. I spent 23 years building fraud cases at First National. I know prosecutorial sufficiency when I reach it. The radio destruction in July, that was your catalyst. No. That was my signal I could close the investigation file. Documentation was absolute. Every transaction traced, every authorization verified, every witness statement recorded. The radio confirmed what I already knew. He was escalating from financial exploitation to property destruction. Time to move. Brandon stared from the defense table, seeing clearly for the first time, not frail elderly woman who cracked under pressure in July, but senior fraud investigator who'd tracked him from week 2, documented every move, built federal case brick by brick, while he believed himself invisible. The gallery included Saskia via video link, Floyd in the third row, Vernon beside me in the witness area, all pieces of investigative network he'd never detected. His defense attorney stood. Your Honor, I request brief recess to consult with my client regarding this testimony. Request denied, Judge Thornton said. Ms. Mercer's investigation timeline doesn't change your client's guilty plea. It simply explains it. She knew from week 2, Brandon whispered audible in the silent courtroom. 13 months. December arrived 4 months after the lockout, and every Wednesday evening, Oakmont Drive transformed. Elder Financial Liberty Association nonprofit I'd founded in September, incorporated in October, held weekly sessions in the living room, where Brandon had once sat planning Charlotte's institutionalization. 14 local seniors attended learning identity, theft markers, bank audit protocols, power of attorney safeguards, legal resource navigation. 23 years investigating fraud taught me that justice isn't revenge, it's documentation, testimony, and systems built to prevent the next victim. Financial predators rely on isolation, confusion, and shame. I told the group Wednesday evening, December 20th. We eliminate all 3. You leave here with knowledge documentation templates and emergency contact protocols. You're never isolated again. A woman in her 70s raised her hand. My daughter wants power of attorney. How do I know she's not? You ask questions, I said. You verify independently. You review account statements monthly, and you never ever sign exhausted. Exhaustion is when predators strike. If someone pressures you to sign immediately, that's your signal to slow down and verify. Floyd Lancaster photographed the meeting, smiling faces, note-taking questions being asked and answered. After 13 months surveilling predation from his window, he now documented protection. Celeste delivered guest lecture on medical power of attorney distinctions, pediatric nurse expertise applied to elder care. She'd been teaching these Wednesday sessions for 6 weeks, rebuilding trust through service. Charlotte attended every session, natural laughter, grounded presence, no nervous tension, fully healed. She spoke with attendees during coffee break, matter of fact, about her experience. I was almost number 48, she told a concerned husband. That's why I'm here, so you're not 49. On the main shelf, visible to everyone who entered, clean cardboard box with handwritten card reading, under restoration, returning soon. 13 months of surveillance from my window, Floyd said after the meeting ended. Never imagined it would lead to this community protection network. Mom, you're teaching what investigators do, Celeste said while cleaning coffee cups, but making it accessible. Russell would love this. Mid-December afternoon, the antique restoration specialist called. Never seen anyone preserve splinters like this, he said. You kept every shard in sequence cataloged by position and size. Because of that, I rebuilt it flawlessly. Every original component restored. My husband always said, hold every piece I told him. You never know what's repairable until you try. He was right. This radio will play for another 50 years. I drove to the workshop that afternoon, retrieved the walnut cabinet wrapped in protective cloth, brought it home in the passenger seat like precious cargo Russell had built and Brandon had destroyed and patient hands had made whole again. Russell always said, hold every piece even when you can't see the pattern, yet restoration requires patience more than tools. I placed the restored radio on the shelf next to Russell's portrait, plugged the cord into the wall outlet, clicked the brass knob clockwise. 3 seconds of static, Then rich, golden sound of autumn leaves flooded the living room. "I kept our perimeter, sweetheart," I said to Russell's photograph. "House is safe. Radio's home." Key turned in the deadbolt. Charlotte entered with groceries, stopped hearing the music, set bags down slowly. She walked to the living room doorway, stood there with one hand on the frame. "I thought I'd never hear that sound again," she said. "Nothing truly broken beyond repair," I said. "Not if you hold every piece." Charlotte sat in the armchair next to mine. Winter sunlight streamed through windows Russell had installed 40 years ago. Jazz played soft and timeless. No threats, no surveillance necessary. Only warmth of home fought for and won. The radio played Autumn Leaves through to the final note, and in the silence that followed, Charlotte said something I'd been waiting 13 months to hear: "I'm home." Not at home, not back home, just home, present tense, permanent. I reached across the space between our chairs and took her hand, and we sat there as winter light turned golden through the windows Russell had installed 40 years ago in the house he'd promised would always be our family's perimeter. Outside, Floyd's motion sensor light clicked on just a neighbor walking his dog past at 4:47 p.m. Nothing sinister, nothing calculated. Just an ordinary evening in an ordinary neighborhood where an extraordinary amount of careful work had restored the possibility of ordinary peace. And that, I realized, was exactly what justice looked like when you built it. Right, so ordinary you could almost forget how much it cost to get there. And to you listening to my story, remember this: sometimes the greatest act of love looks like patience. Looking back, I could have reported suspicions in week 2. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately. But I'd learned from 23 years investigating fraud that allegations without evidence create escape routes. So I documented. I watched. I built a case so airtight that when the moment came, justice was inevitable. That patience saved not just my sister, but 49 other families who will never know how close the next target came to being someone they loved. If someone you love is being exploited financially, emotionally, or otherwise, don't let anger drive your response. Channel it into documentation, photograph statements, record conversations where legal, save texts and emails, build evidence like you're preparing for court because you might be. This isn't just about grandma revenge or protecting one person. It's about stopping predators before they move to their next victim. I believe God gave me investigation training for a reason, and that reason became clear when I saw those 50 folders. Your vigilance might save someone you'll never meet. That's not grandma revenge in the traditional sense, that's protection with purpose. What would you have done in my position? Confront in week 2, or wait to build the case? Leave a comment. I read every one. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about family protection and justice, subscribe to Her Family Revenge. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note. While this story contains fictionalized elements for narrative and reflection, the core message about vigilance documentation and protecting vulnerable loved ones is what I hope stays with you long after the story ends.